Today's episode is brought to you by Element, a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything that you need and nothing that you don't. In other words, no sugar, no artificial coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, and no BS. With Element, I love the watermelon. The watermelon tastes freaking awesome. I drank 1 pack every day, no matter what. People that train out here, it's sitting out here for them all the time. The boxes don't last very long. Right now, Element is offering Table Talk listeners a free sample pack with any purchase. That's 8 single serving packages free with any Element order. Get yours at drinkelement.com/Table Talk. The deal is only available through the link in the description. The other thing is, if you don't like it, you can just give it away to a salty friend and Element will give you a 100% refund. No risk, money back guarantee. Head over to drinkelement.com/Table Talk. I want to let you guys know that we just had a limited edition drop on the website last week of new items that sweatshirt, flannel, t-shirts, shorts. Basically, the limited edition items are the items that directly support the Table Talk podcast. So if you go to elitefts.com/limited edition, or actually just the link in the description, you can find the limited edition items that we have now, which there's the one that I like the best is the shit suck good great, which is all emojis. The designs I always like the best, right? They're the ones that don't sell for shit, you know, but they're the ones that I want to wear that I like the best. And there's the cigar one as well. And they're all there on the screen for you guys to be able to see. So if you go to elitefts.com/limited edition, the other thing that directly helps support the podcast that I haven't talked that much about is the Table Talk crew. The Table Talk crew is extra edition episodes that go out once a month. The content of those episodes are AMA related, question related, that come from the Table Talk Discord group, which is also part of being in the crew. When you're in the crew, there's dozens of ebooks that are in there. There's every seminar that we've ever done is put on there. There's courses that are put on there. There's series that have put on there. The original YouTube channel that we had for many years, before we migrated to the newer one, all that old content is on there. There's discussion groups for just general training, fitness, life, nutrition, basically everything that you can think of is on. So just go look at what that is, or better than that, just go to the description, click on join the crew. That helps directly support the podcast, which is how we're able to keep this thing rolling.
Today's episode is brought to you by EliteFTS.com. Founded in 1998 with the primary aim to live, learn, and pass on. Please help Elite FTS support this mission by smashing the like button, leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and thinking of us for your training needs. If you can put it in a gym bag or load weights on it, Elite FTS has it.
What's going on? I'm Dave Tate. We are broadcasting from the middle of the Elite FTS weight room, where the underground still thrives and you're part of the crew. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. What's going on, guys? We're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Bryce Lewis. I have your stats here, which I'm going to kind of go over, but I think the most important parts here are actually the first most important part is your company is TSA, which is the Strength Athlete, which focuses on coaching strength athletes.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct? Because as I was going through it, it's how much of the demographic is the competitive lifter or power lifters? Maybe not competitive, but just power lifters.
Yeah, it's all either powerlifters or people who want to train like powerlifters and maybe don't want to step on a platform.
Okay, so strength athletes with the big three in mind would be a really good way to summarize that. And you have 13 years of competitive experience, which we're going to go over a little bit, and 10 years of coaching experience. I have here that you started as a bodybuilder, like working a little bit with Eric Helms.
Yeah.
How old were you then?
I think I was 22 when I did my first bodybuilding competition.
Okay, sport. I don't want to go into your like background, how you all started lifting weights and all that, but I am interested in what your sporting background is in regards to sport skill development as you got older.
Yeah.
Visual acuity. Since you're a coach, you know where I'm coming from. Like, where was the endurance component developed or not developed? Where was the explosive component developed or not?
Yeah.
And so forth. So what does that look like?
I started off playing volleyball in high school and ended up playing volleyball in college, kind of like competitive club, not exactly NCAA. But it was, we'd play against other colleges in Northern California. So I went to San Francisco State University at the time and played against like San Luis Obispo and who else? Sonoma and all these other colleges around the area. And it was around that time that I started discovering strength training as basically a way to jump higher. Like I'm 5'6", and it's not a good thing to be in volleyball. So, I really needed to find a way to kind of like have an edge. How can I jump, as high as some of these other guys or block? So I found the bodybuilding.com forums. And then from there, I discovered, resistance training and people trying to improve their bodies. And at a certain point, some of that stuff became more exciting for me than volleyball. And so I kind of switched, kind of found like a new community. And I think the community was really like a drive for me. Here's people who I can like relate with and share this new cool thing that I've discovered with. And that's kind of my start into like really taking fitness into my own hands rather than just like being part of a team sport and kind of, pushing it off to someone else.
What were you studying at the time? Before what I want to know is, did your course of study change when that came into play?
My studies in like an academic sense were always kind of like separate from this. So like I have at this point, like I can't call it an armchair interest because I've been a powerlifting coach for like, 10, 12 years or something like that. But I originally started studying math in college and then switched to philosophy, and philosophy is what I ultimately graduated with. And I think the drive for me there is really just kind of about like understanding our world and our place in the world better.
As R, do you mean from a sociology perspective or
like
psychology?
Ours is like humans. It's like, what is it like to be, a human navigating the world, like meaning of life, consciousness, kind of big questions. And, for better or worse, I really never considered like career as an outcome of college.
Yeah.
And so I really just kind of ended up studying the things that I was interested in at the time. And these were kind of some of the big questions. So
it stayed that course though. So it wasn't like you found being a meathead and then all of a sudden, hey, I love being a meathead. I want to go into exercise science, or I want to. The reason I ask that is it happens frequently.
It does, yeah. And people are like, "Oh, okay, exercise science is my new shit. Like that's my new direction."
Or sometimes I wonder if that's a bad thing. The reason being, as we go through this podcast, there's you gave some topics, and a lot of the topics are more psychology based, and there's a social impact on the sport as well. As we were talking about earlier, how social media impact, all these inner dynamics impact, and they play a role.
Yeah.
You understand that very well because you went to school for that. You see what I'm saying? So your view of this powerlifting world, because of your education, is different than somebody's view that went through strength and conditioning. Right. So it gives a different perspective.
Yeah.
Which I love to learn about, how other people's perspective of the sport is. And we kind of see it on a very narrow basis from here's the science based and here's the meathead based. Right. Okay, cool. But what other bases can come into play?
Yeah.
Well, that's where you get people with other backgrounds, other educational interest that come in, and then they start to relate the sport to that.
Yeah.
Engineers are going to look at it differently than, I don't know, I'm just a photographer.
For sure. Yeah.
They're going to see things in a different realm.
Yeah.
When did you do your first meet? Was in 2010. Was that while you were still in college?
Yeah. So I was still in college at UCLA at the time and decided to compete in a competition. it ended up being open nationals, which is like, single ply knee wraps. I signed up as a raw powerlifter because I knew basically nothing about, what competitive powerlifting is like compared to like how to train like a powerlifter. My training at the time was honestly pretty West Side. We did for quite a while, kind of oscillated back and forth between, I don't know, like a raw powerlifting version of West Side and like, early Shaco template style programs, lots of volume, lots of comp squatting, comp benching, comp deadlifting. And I competed in that competition raw and had a great time. Felt like I did really well, had a community of support. And I think early on, one of the things that drew me to powerlifting was, hey, this is like bodybuilding. I get to train hard, I get to train heavy, but I don't have to diet year round. I don't have to like watch what I eat meticulously every single time, I'm in the kitchen. And as someone who really likes food, likes cooking, likes, I don't know, just living life a little bit more than I think bodybuilders, at least at the time, the impression that I got was, chicken and broccoli and rice all the time. It seemed like a much more pleasant option. And I was good at it too. I was gaining strength really quickly and, not getting injured and having fun with it. So powerlifting was my new thing.
How long did you do the bodybuilding before the powerlifting?
I think I did about 5 bodybuilding competitions in total.
Well, how many years was that over?
3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
And because there's a difference as well, because one, you're on stage posing in front of a lot of people, right? So there are different rewards, right? So when you lift a PR, I don't want to say, when you lift a PR, you're not even sure who saw it. Like maybe your coach did, your training partner, maybe. Like that's an assumption too, because sometimes they're too busy talking to other people. I guess the judges, so 3 people. Whereas in bodybuilding, they're kind of forced to all sit and see, so me being the introverted, I hated the bodybuilding type thing. Yeah.
You're pretty exposed up there, and I guess the reward wasn't worth like all the effort for it. And I think one of the differences too is in powerlifting, there's almost like a greater sense of reward for me, and a greater sense of control over whether I succeed or fail. Like whether I make a bench press PR is up to me, and whether or not I win in a bodybuilding competition is up to a panel of judges, So like in powerlifting, I get to decide if I squat to depth, if I pause long enough on my chest and stuff like that. And of course there's some things that are out of your control, but for the most part, like it's in your hands, and that feels better for me. Yeah. Actually, you just reminded me because you grabbed the packet. We don't want to get dehydrated during the podcast, right? True enough.
Element has a new flavor. So we're going to test it live here on the air, and it's grapefruit salt. So we're going to test this for you guys. So you guys all know me. So if it's going to taste like ass, I'll be the first person to tell you, even though they're a sponsor of the podcast.
I like this stuff, by the way. I bought some from them not too long ago, basically right after a shitty weight cutting experience in competition. And have you ever tried a trior? But it's the thing that like all raw powerlifters use because it has like 3 grams of sodium. And this tastes worlds better. So let's see if this one stands up. What do you think?
Yeah, this is good. I would drink this one. This would go up there with the watermelon.
It's mild, but we combined it with like a liter and a half of water. So put in a little less water, a little stronger tasting. I like it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely good. What I used to use, after we go way back, I used to use horse electrolytes.
Horse electrolytes.
Yeah, and it was nasty as hell, but it suited the purpose.
Yeah.
For what it was, just this pink powder shit. Yeah. Because you couldn't find anything else, so you just went to the horse supply store.
What is it with powerlifters and getting horse supplies? Because I know horse liniments is another.
Well, I think it's being in Ohio and having pretty good access to horse supply stores, so it's just down the street, you go there, and you had to pick up the liniment. So while you're there, you just like scouring the shelves, like what could I take? Yeah. If it's good for $1 million racehorse, it's got to be good for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know, because I wasn't introduced to it until I came to Westside, because before that it was just go to CVS and buy whatever liniment was the hottest I could find. And then it's like this blue shit, like try the blue stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, like, it's got to be better. It's for horses,
We talked about progressive overload before, so progressive overload everything, including your liniments.
Exactly. So that's kind of where that all came about, and then it went into different supplements. Then it went into that because you're just walking through the shelf. I remember walking through the shelf, I'm like, oh, they mix, they mix that in with their oats. I eat oats.
Problem solved. Yeah.
I can mix this in with my oats.
Yeah.
They'll help me gain weight. Then you're puking for the next 3 hours. I'm trying to think of some of the other stupid shit. It was the liniments is pretty much what it ended up to, but the electrolytes definitely went in, and that was different purposes because you were using it to reconstitute, right? I was just using it to get more bloated,
right?
Because I was under the class to be able to pull into it. But that becomes tricky too, because if you go too far, your body's in a constant state of of compensation.
Yeah.
It wants to come back down. And then when it would come back down, it goes down lower than what it originally started at.
Yeah.
So I had to peak my bloat to be able to hold when I wanted it, which was through the squat.
Yeah.
And then if it started to come off after that, great.
Yeah.
I don't need it for the bench. I certainly don't want it for the deadlift. Now, if I held it the whole time, you can't hold the bar. Your hands are bloated.
Yeah, your fingers are bloating.
It's a problem. But if it starts to spill out after the squat, perfect.
Yeah.
So I had a process, to be able to go through.
And
where you're doing water cuts, was that right? Because I should point out, and I think I noted it here because it's going to become a part of the conversation, that you've been drug-free this whole time.
Yeah.
Right. So with your weight cuts, I'm assuming that there's not Lasix and other stuff associated with that.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's just
no
straight.
LASIK, and not even I don't know, enemas or IV rehydration or something like that. So my main methods of intervention for acute weight cuts were gut content manipulation, fluid manipulation, and electrolyte manipulation, the main things we play with.
Well, you say were because you just competed not that long ago, right?
Yeah.
And that was successful, and you did another weight cut.
I did. Yeah. So it was successful in the sense that I made weight, but a terrible weight cut in every other way. This weird, bewildering sense of what is going on with my body. I worked with a nutritionist this time, she did everything right. I made weight. And I didn't even have to use the sauna or anything like that, which actually I forgot. Active dehydration is another method that we'd sometimes use, hot tub, sauna, stuff like that. But I was cramping the entire day. And, unsure about, how do I fix this? Oh, you need more water, drink more water. And so I was slamming more water and nothing was getting better. I was mentioning this before the podcast, but I'm stand up from a squat rep in warm-ups and my quad was cramping. Or go to itch my shoulder and my bicep would cramp, or tie my shoes, my fingers are cramping, system wide shut down. And I think it was just the case that I didn't have enough sodium. So I was talking to someone and they suggested, a product this or something like that. I'm no stranger to added sodium, but I just think even so, I was under what I needed to have.
To me, it was interesting because I started listening to some of your older podcasts before, because last week I was out of town. So a few weeks ago, I started listening to all those things and then some of your other content. And then when I got back, I picked up, I'm like, no, wait, he just competed, right? So there was that, okay, this is new shit. I need to know what this is. So I need to pay attention here. And then you got weight, where I swear I heard on the earlier ones that the reason you went up is to stop cutting weight, right? So your body was like, no, I'm done with this class. I just need to go back up.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, the question here, why did you decide to cut again?
Yeah. So a lot of times my decisions in weight classes in powerlifting over the 13 years that I've been competing were around how can I get to the world level? How can I either win a national championship or get to the world level? And some of it was just fuck, there's this really good person in my weight class. I don't think I can beat them. Maybe there's another weight class I can be better in. So that was, do you know Jesse Norris? Jesse Norris was my first reason to move up from the 93 kilo weight class to the 105 kilo weight class. because he was like, I don't know, unstoppable, like 2,000 pound total at 93 kilos. Like still today, his performance at some local level competition where he squatted, I don't know, 725 and deadlifted 825 or something like that was and is a historic performance. And I thought, I actually asked him directly, like, hey man, are you competing in the 93 kilo weight class? He said, yeah, I am. So I'm like, well, I'll move up. And I ended up competing as a 105 kilo lifter and winning national championships. And then, you know, had a path to the world championship and kind of was able to move forward from that. So fast forward another few years, there's another huge, very successful athlete in the 105 kilo division. I thought, well, I'm not going to really be able to beat him. And it was also at a time where powerlifting felt a little bit stale to me. It kind of felt like, all right, I feel like I want a new challenge. I feel a little bit sluggish in my body. You know, going upstairs kind of sucks. You know, tying my shoes kind of sucks. Can I feel better physically in my body? Can I drop a weight class, potentially be more competitive? And so I started a slow diet from 105 kilos back down to 93 kilos. And that's the weight class that I just competed in.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel better?
Oh yeah. Yeah. A lot better. And you know, it's, in some ways unfortunate to think like my body image was like tied so closely to my body weight that like I felt uncomfortable and even, I don't know, less confident in my body as a 105 kilo athlete as I did as a 93 kilo athlete. But especially in the age of social media right now, like appearance is important. I can't help but compare myself against some other people out there. And so being a little bit leaner did improve my self-confidence. I wish it wasn't the case, but
yeah, I was going to say, how do you play that game when your sport is what's lifted on the platform, which is what matters most? And it's, you know, I should know the people that don't know. I mean, you've had 4 national titles in 2 different weight classes. I mean, I'm not sitting here talking to like an intermediate lifter. You're an advanced lifter. Yeah. You know, talking about body image, which is a weird thing because to me, it's a weird thing. It's not a weird thing, obviously, the people that deal with it. So I need to step that back a little bit. For sure. But when it's all based upon the total, you would think that's where that motivation would come from. Yeah. So, and I'm sure you're not the only person. So how do you toe that line? Yeah. I think I've always been either like more vulnerable than most, or like I'm just experiencing the same things everyone else does, but I just talk about them a little bit more often. Probably. You know, like everyone goes through these body image issues and comparisons and stuff like that. I've just been able to kind of like articulate some of this stuff, and you know, maybe other people are going through the same thing. So, I think powerlifters, like many other people, like want it all. We want to be super shredded, super strong, you know, like, you know, insane cardio capacity. Yeah. Like we just want to maximize everything. And, it's unfortunate when you realize that you can't exactly have it all, or like sometimes going really hard on one thing necessarily means that you're going to like decrease other things. Not to say there aren't people who are strong and are lean and are at the top of their field. Like there are those people. Maybe, but in their own mind, they're probably battling the same things. It's very true. Yeah, it's very true. Where people are looking at you thinking that you're that person. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So my coach, his coaching company, 3D Muscle Journey, they put out some posts that like really resonated with me. And it was basically like the weight class or the body weight that you perform best in may not be your favorite one. So it may not be the one that you know, feel best in or look best in. And I think as we look at a lot of powerlifting performances out there, like the best squat performances are typically from those who are carrying a little bit more body fat, because it allows you to kind of like squish in the bottom of the squat a little bit more. And it's just kind of like the nature of part of that stuff. So part of my journey as a lifter has kind of been about like accepting my body and how do I be comfortable, you know, navigating these two worlds. When you came in and say at the 2010 time period, you did say single ply. The raw that we know today, it was around then, but I don't think it really started to build up steam until 2012, 2013. So when you came in, now you came in through the USAPL, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So you're kind of tracked one way to begin with. So there's not a lot of pull. This is one huge thing that I wish people would understand is where somebody comes in usually ends up staying the track that they stay. Right. And it's frustrating to me to see people get bashed for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, are you in that fucking federation for? What do you do? That's all they've ever known.
Yeah.
That's how they came through. That would be the same as going back to the other people and say, why the fuck you always in the APF?
Yeah.
Like, dude, it's all you knew.
It's not just about like the training style or, you know, the equipment either. It's the culture. It's your community.
Yes.
Who are all your friends and where are they? And I know so many powerlifters today make decisions on which federation to compete in just based on friends and stuff like that too. So the interconnectedness of culture with lifting, I think, is really underrepresented.
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time. And it's to me, it's frustrating, maybe because I'm older, have a different look on things. Because if they just looked at their own journey, they would see exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just in a different realm. But you're still even on that side, the single ply was way more popular. And I would say, I'll ask, was the raw being raw, you know, sleeve raw, whatever it was at the time, because it was still being defined. It could have been bare knees,
Yeah.
sleeves, wraps. Well, I don't think they really figured it out then. Were they being, the word's not chastised, not incentivized, right? In a polite way.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that? Did it feel like there was a greater pull into, man, you should be in single ply. If you're not into the single ply, then you're really not powerlifting.
Mm-hmm. I think when I came into powerlifting, so single ply was still a thing, but
Yeah.
it was kind of like this almost like sideshowy kind of like separate thing of like super hardcore people who were kind of like clicking in their own little niche in
Wow,
that world.
really?
However, when I first started, I started squatting with wraps because like, as I was looking around, people would squat with wraps and like, that was the thing to do. So I think some of my earliest pairs, like I only ever had Elite FTS wraps actually.
Yeah.
Like that was when I had disposable income, and Elite FTS was some of the first shit I ever bought. Anyways, quickly, like it just kind of seems like, oh, well, you wear knee sleeves, and it was the Reband blue knee sleeves. Like that was the thing that everyone had. And that's what you wear. It's almost like a uniform, you know, like you show up to training session in a uniform in the same way that like, I guess jujitsu people have like the gi, and like, that's what you wear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, because I thought that's telling me that the raw, because the raw was building more on that side of the sport, the drug-free side.
Yeah.
I believe faster than it was on the non-drug-free side.
Mm-hmm.
And I always assumed that because of the IPF worlds and all that, the single ply dominated still for many years, you know, up to, I'm just guessing now, 2015. I don't know.
You're absolutely right. So at the international level, single ply was absolutely the thing. And even to this day continues to be the thing in a lot of like the stronghold countries like Russia and Ukraine. Who else at the international level? Some of the Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, like very strong single ply culture, you know, dominant. And so I think that still continues to be the case, even though raw powerlifting is like largely taken over in the United States, in you know, many countries, really.
I was going to say, has it in all the other countries too? Because I'm making an assumption that it has, with the exception of the few that you're talking about. Yeah,
I think so I have personally a lot of love for single ply. My wife competes in single ply. So she's also a world champion and getting ready for Powerlifting America Nationals in a few weeks here. And kind of through her, I've been able to learn more about like that side of powerlifting. I've gotten very good at wrapping knees, by the way. So if anyone needs a knee wrap, you know, putting on tailoring suits, you know, sewing up the sides and seaming it up and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice kind of having one foot in each door. And even so, the single ply side, and she'll be the first one to admit, is dramatically reduced in membership, in interest, in, awareness, all those kind of things.
Oh, you can see it. I mean, these are things that make me laugh too, by the way, because people that argue against it, it's like, dude, there's a website. You can just go look. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I see it more on the multiply side than everything else. It's like, no, it's still just as bad. You can go look and see exactly how many. It's like, no, that's not true.
Yeah.
It's right there. It's pretty big what's going on. Where I do wonder though if all roads lead back to single ply, just with and I don't know what's going on with, actually you will, how are the knee sleeves being, because they're changing. The last couple of years, knee sleeves have radically changed. Is that also changing in the USAPL? What's the new one? I don't want to get into politics.
Powerlifting America, PA.
Is it just PA?
Yeah, it's PA.
Are they embracing those sleeves, or are they staying with what was pre 2 years ago?
Yeah. In that same spirit of, I don't know, an arms race that we were talking about, like we need to make everything better. And I'm sure, you have your own stories of multiply and single ply equipment just getting stronger and stronger. I think everyone is looking for an edge. How can I get better? So we went from like reband knee sleeves, which were meant for weightlifting, really, to SPD. And, now there's like Inzer sleeves and stuff like that. And I haven't tried a lot of the range out there, but I think
are they allowed, I guess would be the question.
They are allowed.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
They're certainly allowed. So there are equipment specs, and as long as you're within the specs, then your equipment is good. And the IPF, not only does your stuff have to be to spec, but you also have to pay.
Oh yeah, I know.
I'm sure.
No, I can go on a rant about that.
So it's 7 millimeters is the maximum thickness for neoprene. And I think there's even like a length distinction. As long as you're within that, I think it's fine.
All right. So it's because I can look and see the single ply of today far outperforms the multiply I had pre-canvas.
Yeah.
Okay. So whatever that is, and that's always going to happen where I keep waiting for the singlets to just, you know what I'm saying? Just get a little bit better.
Yeah.
And with my first meet being like 84 or something like that, I'm waiting to see the singlet that is better than the suit that I had to wear in the first meet that I lifted in.
Yeah.
Back then I assumed that it said you had to use it. I guess I could have used a singlet.
Sure.
But nobody did.
Yeah.
It was always this other stuff. But that's a conversation that can just go on forever. But as long as they stay within the confines of the rules, then there is some limitation on what can happen. But there's, as I've seen through multiply, there's always ways to stay within the rules that still are kind of not in the rules, but in the rules.
Totally. I think one thing that's true about powerlifting is everyone is going to try to find a way to just barely edge that line of what is allowed versus what like I can do and get away with. And we just see that all the time, like people sizing down on knee sleeves. Like I used to wear medium knee sleeves, and now I can fit small knee sleeves on my knees. And on the single ply side, like people will jack the shirt collar down a little bit to get the like toughest part kind of closer to the line of the press, and just like barely touch the chest before they get the press command. And so like we're all just kind of looking to maximize. And I think if we look at powerlifting through that lens, it's less about like brute strength and more about maximizing like a specific piece of equipment. So I've heard single ply compared to like NASCAR racing, where it's like you plus, it's driver plus equipment. Like that's the thing. And I think the best analogy is one that my wife uses, and it's that single ply powerlifting is like pole vaulting. So you can jump, you can do a high jump, but this gives you a device that lets you jump higher. Just kind of how can I maximize this device to jump even higher?
It's so entertaining to me because if they need the analogies, they need not look further than just what multiply guys were saying 12, 15 years ago. because it's the same thing where the part that I liked about it and still like about it, any gear play thing, caveat to a point. There's a point. It's different commerce, but to a point. And actually, I can probably define that point as long as it becomes a skill, right? Because nobody's just going to put on this single ply shirt and figure out how to pull it down, how to jack it up, how to tweak it, what alterations to make. They're not going to know that in 8 weeks, even if you're helping them or somebody that really, really knows it.
Yeah.
It's going to take you, if you're helping a client of yours, it's going to take you a few meets to really dial it in, and then hope they don't panic when it starts to compress too much. Yeah. It's a skill, like any other sport. We have a skill where the strength and conditioning is, the training is a skill. The lifts are a skill. Here's another skill where now if you take somebody that may not have the greatest genetics, 8, 9, or 10 on a scale of 10. Yeah. But they have a 6 or 7, but the 8, 9, or 10 doesn't learn the gear, the skill. They don't take the time to actually learn the skill. They can get beat by the 6 or 7. Yeah. Right. And pretty handedly, they can really be able to get beat. And then the other geek part about all this, nerd part that I like about all this, is not only is it a skill, but it's a skill that you got to figure out how to implement and train when you're at 80 to 90% of your max strength. Yeah. Which is a short window when you're talking about a peaking time frame. Yeah. Without overreaching, so now it's like, oh shit, it becomes a very complex variable when you're a nerd into this sport, a very cool one. Yeah. To be able to put in there, and it kind of an equalizer. Now I see the other side of that because I've been a part of this gear thing since I started. Strip all that away, then it really comes down to just who's the strongest. Sure. Kinda, because there's skill in the list too, which we'll talk about. Yeah. Which can equalize to some degree. And, but is that a sport that if somebody that's just genetically stronger and more gifted at a basic movement pattern that doesn't really have to do a whole lot, but can just come in and just beat everybody. And then as that person that's under that level, you need to kind of, as you were saying, you need to think about, do I want to compete against this person or go to this other person? Where you can have more of and on gear, you could go against them. Sure. Hopefully they don't learn their shit. Yeah. You learn it so you can bridge that gap. But the other strategy is, well, maybe you just don't. Maybe you go a different person, or maybe you try to get them on formula. And there's coaching things too. You can get them on, them just being stupid, you hope.
Absolutely. You can be better at attempt selection. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's all that too. Since we're already kind of going down this road, what prompted you to want to get into the coaching?
I was kind of at this transition in my life. I just finished college and I love powerlifting. I already kind of had like a little bit of following. I loved kind of sharing stuff about powerlifting. Felt like I had something to give. And I was either going to go back to school for a PhD program and kind of like, I would have to take some new undergrad classes in science because I wanted to kind of like go a neuroscience route and kind of continue that. Where's our place in the world kind of stuff, but more from like a consciousness, let me explore the brain kind of aspect, or let me be a powerlifting coach and let me just try that out for a little while and see how that went. And it went very well. And it has been going well for this entire time. So I went up to Northern California to see a few of the other 3DMJ coaches and just kind of get some advice. And Eric Helms, in addition to being my coach, has also been my mentor for many years. And I've leaned on him for countless pieces of advice. And so my original thought was, can I just be like a 5th coach for 3DMJ? And they thought, no, but I think you can do this on your own. I think you've got what it takes to kind of like launch your own company. And so I basically locked myself in my bedroom for like 2 weeks and came up with a brand and a name and a website and a launch strategy and all that kind of stuff, and just kind of started from there.
Well, aren't they more hypertrophy based anyhow?
Bodybuilding. Yeah.
Bodybuilding based.
Yep.
So I could kind of see why that would be a pleasant no.
Yeah.
Because it's a different demographic. And then how do you fit this in this model, even though I ranted yesterday with Mike Israel.
Yeah.
This will post a week after yesterday, so it's not going to really be yesterday, but kind of
no longer relevant.
That there is a place for hypertrophy phases to go into training, and that sometimes that gets overlooked. So I can see that because from it. Interesting, but I can see it because it wouldn't benefit you. It would definitely benefit them, but not as that much.
Yeah.
But it would hurt you more than it would benefit them.
Yeah.
Which was a very humble, modest, and integrity call.
Yeah.
By Eric.
I think they had their own thing too. You know, they were heavy into bodybuilding and still, you know, like put out information about powerlifting and have a few successful powerlifters. But it's not their main thing, like strength training. It's really kind of people looking to improve physique, people competing in bodybuilding, very heavy into natural bodybuilding culture and all that kind of stuff. So I'm thankful that it worked out the way that it did.
So when this started, it was right at I don't want to say the beginning of online coaching, but the beginning of what we know as online coaching today. That might be a better way to frame it.
Yeah.
So it was kind of an open scape, an open landscape.
Mm-hmm.
How did you approach that?
So I came up with a mission statement and, leaned pretty heavily on like the business model of 3D Muscle Journey at the time. They were, really liberal with kind of sending me like, okay, well, this is how we do our billing structure and that kind of like back end type of stuff, like stuff that like as a business owner, I hate doing accounting or any kind of stuff like that. So the leg up really helped in that kind of things. But we were sending through email with clients Excel documents back and forth. So like I would send them one, they would put in their week, attach it to an email and send it back with like a written text response. And essentially everything has gotten more multimedia as time has gone on. That was the first phase. And then it was, let me record a video to you, and then you can record a video back to me, and we can kind of bounce videos back and forth. Nowadays, I have a small enough roster that I just have a weekly call with each one of my athletes, and we chat for 15 to 30 minutes, and it's great, getting to sit down essentially with someone, face to face like this, full attention back and forth, and we're able to kind of go through and answer questions and discuss anything in training that needs to be discussed.
Now, do you have coaches that are underneath you?
Yes. So I work with 4 of the coaches. There's Hanny, there's Eric, there's Alyssa, and there's Angela. And together, I think we serve about 100 athletes or so around the world.
How have the athletes changed since you first started? That's a big, broad question, right? How have they changed on a macro level, right? Because the sport's blown up, right? Especially the raw, drug-free. Actually, I'm going to step that back. The drug-free side has always been bigger. People bitch at me all the time when I say this. That's why I like to say it, because it's just going to make people bitch more. Yeah. But let's just critically think about this. Correct me if I'm wrong. If there's 250,000 competitive powerlifters on open powerlifting, and if you look at the totals and you look at the lifts and just go through any weight class, and then ask yourself, what could a typical gym bro or gym, what do we call it, gym girl, gym broette, right? Yeah. What could they do? And then just go down the list until you find what that is. Yeah. I'm going to assume pretty much anybody under that is drug-free, or the shit they're taking is not good. It's not, so if you start dealing with what is actually obtainable by the majority, that none of this natty or not bullshit, but the majority of people are going to say, yeah, you can do that drug-free. Look at that number, and then look at all the people above them. And then look across the board on all weight classes, and you're going to see the majority of the people are lifting weights that are pretty obtainable, actually very obtainable, drug-free. Yeah. So that's my first common sense course there. Now, has it gotten bigger over the years? 100%. The last few years it's been a little ridiculous, in my opinion, is what's been going on. But to sit there and have people say, oh man, 90% of all powerlifters are taking shit. It's like, dude, you're an idiot. No way.
Yeah.
Go look. Like if that's true, 90% are, then go to the bottom 10% and then look at what the next 10% above that is.
Yeah.
Tell me they're taking shit. Because even if they were taking shit and their form sucked and everything else sucked, they would be lifting more.
Yeah.
And this is not a knock on those people. You know, they competed. That's a great thing. I don't want to sit here, I want to sit here and bash them, for whatever their journey is. But to sit there and you see where I'm coming from?
I do.
I don't understand why people miss this so much, but
yeah, maybe, I don't know. I think part of the reason why people go that direction is because it feels better thinking that if someone is stronger than me, then they must be cheating.
Well, you know that.
Yeah.
I mean,
they must be doing something that I'm not doing. I tend to operate under the, I don't know, like a principle of goodwill, that if someone's competing in drug-free powerlifting, then they're drug-free. And if they happen to get tested and tested positive, I'm like, shit, I was wrong, or something like that, which, happens occasionally, but the rate that it happens is minuscule. And does that mean that there aren't people who are just really good at evading the system? Yes, absolutely. But drug testing methods have improved dramatically over time. It's not random drug testing. They're actively trying to catch people. There are a lot of safeguards to keep drug-free sport drug-free. And I think they're effective by and large.
Yeah. And even if what you're saying is true, and it is, there are definitely people that there's a reason why many will say it's drug tested instead of drug free, but now you're dealing with another skill set.
Yeah.
How do you beat the test? Which is a skill set, and it's not an easy skill set, and it's something that people are going to have to learn how to master there too.
Yeah.
That's a minority of people, a smaller minority than people think, because the people that are doing it don't actually want to let other people know that they're doing it.
Yeah.
Right. So now you can't make a broad assumption based upon that, because now you're talking about maybe a very, I can't only know the 0.001%. I mean, I don't know how many, it depends how many people are in a class, but it's so small that people will take that and apply it to the whole weight class from person 1 all the way down to 5,066.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, it's not. So I forget what we were even talking about before I went off on this tangent.
Well, there is an important thing to talk about. And I think that powerlifters have really actually gotten better over the last 5 years or so. Like the numbers are just like, insane these days. And explaining that, I think, is important for people, because as someone who's just starting off in powerlifting, and there's, like drug-free 850-pound squats and 900-pound deadlifts and other amazing feats of strength, and you think, well, I have no chance. I think the talent pool is larger because powerlifting, or raw powerlifting, is very popular right now, and I think that a lot of the training methods for raw powerlifting have matured or gotten better over the last 5 years. Those are probably like the two big factors in my mind.
I would put a third in there that. Yeah. Because you can see the numbers the numbers are achievable because you see other people doing them, where even at not the world records, right? So say the 900-pound deadlift. Yeah, okay, sure. People are going to be like, that's unobtainable, but it makes the 800 look more obtainable.
I know what you mean. Something happened for me around a 7-pound squat where I had to, it sounds weird to say it, but like I had to see a few people do it to know it was possible, to know that I could do it.
Yeah.
Almost like someone setting an example that I could follow.
Yes. Now this would be one of the pros that we could get from social media, where strip that away. The only time you ever saw that was at a meet.
Yeah.
And now you have the ability to be able to see that in real life, and well, not real life, but on a screen. And yeah, you can sit there and think there's fake plates or whatever it is, but if you're in the sport, who competes, who doesn't, is this bullshit or not? It's when they're striking range. So then it's almost like confirmation bias that you can do this because it's already happened before. And your point to the strength training methods maturing it's true, but I wonder if it's if the methods have always been matured, but they weren't shared as effectively, right? Because there's always been strong people. There's always been people that have kind of had it figured out.
Yeah.
But it was really hard to spread some of the most important things.
Yeah.
Which regulating your own training is one of the bigger ones for people to really get to the top level.
Yeah.
And that's a tough one to try to communicate with an article.
Yeah. And articles really were the format for communication for a long time. Yeah, there's some balance to strike there with long form content versus short form content. But, you know, I was out in the lobby before the podcast and seeing 2 decades worth of powerlifting magazines out there as the primary way that this kind of information was shared before. And now it's really easy to access. Maybe we used to be in an information deficit, and I think now we're in an information surplus.
Oh, yeah.
There's too much now. It's hard to tell what is true and what isn't anymore.
I agree. The only reason I pause is if they learn the basics, it's not. Because what I've been guilty of, because I've seen it, I'm smart enough to be able to look back and say, oh yeah, I did that, right? And now I see what was the outcome of that is you would have pre-internet. Come on. I mean, I'm like aging the shit out of myself, but you have like pre-internet, but then you'll have different pods of lifters, not really gyms, but pods. Cause it could be these group of guys from the IPF or the USAPL, but they're in their own little clique, share information, kind of do everything relatively close the same way. Where I was part of certain crews, West Side and, you know, crews before that, where everything was kind of done close to the same way. Enough the same way to say it's kind of the same way, but there's some variance where the cues are going to be the same. Do this, you know, arch, you know, stuff like that. Yeah. And then when the internet comes, and then the only way you can have the information come out is articles, or even before articles, magazines. That cue of, I'll use the arch as an example for the squat, like arch, you know, so it gets written in these articles, and then the cue that worked within this group of people who all have spinal erectors the size of 2-liter, you know, bottles. It's not really arching. It's getting your lats and your back tight. But the cue to that person was that, which is arch, which then works, right? And that pod gets written. Then when it gets written, and then it gets applied to said 6'2", 180-pound person, somebody's trying to coach them. Now all of a sudden it looks like a C. That's not, is it a C? Because, so you see what I'm saying? So now their spine looks like that because they're supposed to arch. Now you got that going on in one pod. You got another pod that's saying, keep your head down, like look down, where what they kind of really mean is neutral. So then all this goes online in one format written. Then again, now what's happened over a period of time is 2 things. People that just get set in their ways, like, no, that's what you're fucking supposed to do, because they don't understand the cue wasn't actually, the cue produced the end result you were looking for, but it doesn't apply across all means because people need different cues. Things come online, people start looking at it and say, this doesn't look right with the 185, 6'2" person. And at first it was like, this is bullshit. This is lying, motherfucker. You know, then it's positioning and stuff like that. Over a period of decades, 2 decades, that's all kind of cleaned itself up. It's like everybody's kind of in alignment with, this is what a solid technical squat is. There's some form variances that play into that. But here's what we're all looking for. I see where he was coming from. I see what he was coming from. I see what he was coming from. All the positioning on that's kind of gone away because it was low hanging fruit. Like, you're an idiot because you're telling people to do this. That is another thing that I think technique wise has propelled the sport. Because it cleaned all that shit up, which probably needed. You know, it did actually, not probably, it needed cleaned up, but you don't know it until hindsight. Then you can look back and say, oh shit, I see why that was. Bracing is another one that was really weird. You know, 800 different ways to do the same thing. And And we all know that those technical efficiencies or changes, man, they're huge.
They make a huge difference. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned a few things there. One is sometimes when things get shared, they lose the context that really gave that thing the meaning. Mm-hmm. So like the context for some of these cues were, hey, this is a single ply or a multiply lifter. And that's not like a tiny piece of information. It's a massive piece of information. Mm-hmm. And when that gets put out of the conversation, we really miss a lot. And the other piece is good technique isn't just combining a lot of the technique cues that are out there. Like it's not just, all right, let me look around at the top 10 cues and let me just do all of those and then I'll have a good squat. Mm-hmm. It's a process of, first off, starting with something like that looks pretty darn good. Like, let me start off with just a basic high bar squat. And then you can kind of like slowly modify and adapt and find things that work for you specifically. I think like if I were to restart powerlifting, so first off, I was pretty lucky. Like I've squatted high bar for my entire time, besides like a few 6-month periods of trying low bar squatting. Like I've had pretty stable technique and I'm built to be a pretty well-rounded lifter. So that's kind of made things a little bit easier for me. But for new lifters, like I would just encourage most people to like just do conventional deadlifting, high bar squatting, and like a mid-grip bench press for like 2 years. Then you can really start experimenting and kind of like fine tune stuff. Because if you never heard a cue in your life and you lifted for 2 years, you would develop some of your own cues, just kind of purely based on experience and practice and figuring this stuff out.
Mm-hmm. Is that what you have your beginners do?
Yeah. For people who don't have a background in resistance training or powerlifting or haven't competed yet, I strongly suggest people start off with the easy stuff. Let's get you to learn how to hip hinge effectively. Like, let's learn what a good RDL looks like. Let's learn what a good deadlift looks like. Let's build up some of like the basic body weight movements, like a dip pattern, a push-up pattern. Let's get those to look really good. Not before we work on bench pressing and stuff like that, but at the same time, essentially just like, what is the most distilled version of this that still allows you to build strength at a great rate, but we're not trying to like maximize every possible thing down the road. And that kind of, I think, opens up a better path for them to learn that other stuff easier.
I saw a video and I agree with you 100% on long-term planning, programming. And you've done it because you've been doing it for 13 years. And it's great. And no, I don't want to say in theory, it's great because it works. Mm-hmm. And it's great because it works to a point that you actually get to where you wanted to go. You win the Worlds.
Sure.
Then all of a sudden it's like, right? Because the whole journey was about getting to the Worlds, mm-hmm. or maybe some people it's just qualifying for the Worlds,
yeah,
or breaking a world record. Then you get there, and that may have been in your mind 4, 5, 6 year. Mm-hmm. Anybody that's realistic is going to plot this out. Nobody, I don't want to say nobody, we know that's not true. Realistic people are going to understand this is not going to happen in a year.
Yeah.
It's going to have to chip away. But then after, so a couple questions here. How do you, with your beginners or your intermediates, get them to think a little bit longer term? Because there's the other caveat, you're not sure they're going to stay with you mm-hmm. that long term. So how do you kind of sell them, or do you not? Because somebody like Mike Toucher doesn't.
Yeah.
It's forward facing type programming.
Sure.
So I guess the first question is, do you do that, or is it more of a forward or a move forward type thing like Mike uses?
Sometimes these conversations are explicit, and sometimes they're just kind of like, I don't know, slightly baked into other conversations about progression. Early people really want to know, like, how long is it going to take me to squat 500 pounds? How long is it going to take me to bench press 315, or some of these like milestone numbers, because they want it now and because it's exciting. I kind of thought like the same thing early on. There's this tension between setting external goals and extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation that have become kind of like cornerstones of conversations that we try to have with athletes. Being externally motivated is great. That's chasing a world record, that's chasing a national title, a world title, something like that. These things can help motivate effort. But the problem is when they're removed, or when you accomplish them or are seeking out the next thing. Also, we have no control over when they happen, really. If I say like, I want to squat 800 pounds, what more am I going to do today than I'm already doing the most that I can? I can't accelerate progress any more than my body is capable of, within the bounds. So sometimes setting external goals is just, it's just putting a number on a random date and time and saying, yep, that's when it's going to happen, but we really don't have any control over it. And I think, and the research bears this out too, that intrinsic motivation is longer lasting, encourages a lot of other behaviors that are supportive. So it's not just about the training, it's also about the sleep. Intrinsic motivation kind of helps with balancing your training with everything else going on in your life. And so I really try to ask athletes, what is it about powerlifting that you like? If you would never hit a PR again, what is it about training itself that feels valuable and motivating to you? What are the aspects about your community, about your friends, about the social experience, or like the experience of lifting itself that maybe aren't as directly tied to you competing and performing well and stuff like that? What does the act of competing itself feel like to you? So that piece about intrinsic motivation, I try to instill in people because I think it makes them enjoy powerlifting more longer term rather than right now.
How do you guide them to the answers of those questions? Because those are not easy questions to answer without them really, really thinking about it.
Yeah. You can start with their own direct experience. So someone had a great training session, and you can use that as a prompt to say like, well, what did you enjoy about that training session? How did it feel to just do a heavy set of 5 and just kind of go through that. So kind of using almost like journal-like prompts, that intersection between almost like lifting as a tool for life discovery is something that I think if people spend enough time in sport, it doesn't have to be powerlifting, but spend enough time in sport, learn that lessons learned from sport kind of pass on to other areas about delayed gratification and intrinsic motivation, doing something because you love it. So I would really just kind of either use explicit questions. Here's a question. I want you to spend some time thinking about it. Or you start off with an experience that they had, good or bad, and then you can kind of like riff off of that.
What do you mean riff off of that?
With an experience that they had, use that as a launching point for some discovery about questions. And there's all kinds of things that can start that question asking process about motivation. Maybe someone gets injured and they're not able to train the way that they want. You can use that as an opportunity to like fuel intrinsic motivation, just the process of doing this because you love it. What is it about lifting in this moment that you really find passionate? Will you do this for the rest of your life, or is this just a thing that you're doing right now, and why really?
So I think these are critical conversations, because two things come to my mind when you were talking about that is, conversations I've had with lifters that have fulfilled the goals that they wanted to do, right? So long-term goals, they hit them. They're big ones. I mean, big ones. I don't want to throw names out, but big ones. Then they're like, then they don't really, they know what's next. Like, well, just repeat. You just repeat. But because I feel they don't have a handle on what you're talking about, the other aspects associated with powerlifting, and I'm sure any sport or any business, I call it like the Wizard of Oz. At some point you see what's behind the curtain and you don't like it.
Yeah.
Nobody does. There's not one lifter I know that once they get to that point and they start to see the political bullshit that's associated with federations, is like, sure, yeah, this is cool. Not one. They all don't like it. But as long as you're oblivious to it and you're on the yellow brick road, it's all cool.
Yeah.
But when you get to this weird spot that you've kind of fulfilled what you want, and that shit that you used to not even pay attention to becomes louder and louder and louder. And sometimes I wonder if it's because they're contemplating and exiting, and that gives them a reason. Like, fuck this, I'm done. That's the reason. Where I like to come in and remind them why they got in the first place.
Yeah.
because when you compete at your level or at a higher level, you're in a bubble. The meets you go to are top level.
Mm-hmm.
You're not seeing the 60-year-old that just went through chemo and pulled 185, where everybody's like, man, that's fucking awesome. You're not seeing that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're seeing like, oh man, it's a fucking awesome all-time world record. It's different, but it's not why you got into it. You know, so if I can remind them of that, then it kind of pulls them in. The other part, which is more challenging, is when they can't let go. You know, so now they're mid 50s, you know, purple, you know, everybody sees that, dude, like, what are you doing? But it's so wrapped up in their identity that it's, to them, it's still about this numbers and hitting a PR and all the other stuff. But if it was really only about that, they would have quit a long time ago. They haven't been doing it for 35 years because of numbers. There's some intrinsic motivational part of this journey that they love, but they yet have not defined. And then they can't define it. Then they have, you know, problems. You know, identity problems and all this other stuff. And to hear you say that with the beginners and the intermediates, you're trying to have them figure this out is a great thing, because to try to have people figure this out later, it's really hard.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I want to back up for a second and say that, you know, as you're talking about the stuff about identity, this is all like hitting so hard, because maybe about a week or two ago, I decided that I was done competing. You know, to kind of like, I'd had my last competition. I don't really feel that same drive and motivation to compete at the top level. You're absolutely right. Like, my own vision had narrowed to, like, you know, just my competitors at the international level and, you know, just getting back to that international level and stuff like that. And a lot of like characteristics that had been going on in my training were geared toward what can I do to get back to the international level, and kind of extrinsically focused motivation. And so I do want to spend some time talking about that kind of stuff, because I think it's not talked about enough. And a lot of athletes are probably going through what I just went through or are going through right now. But I signed up for Crunch Gym in our
there's a pivot.
And so, you know, I'm still doing some squatting, some benching and deadlifting. Like, I did some sets of 8 with 495, you know, which is like bread and butter training volume for me on squats. And this kid came up to me and he was like blown away with my squats. And I had realized kind of like how small of a bubble I had put myself in. You know, I trained at a powerlifting gym with other high level athletes, and I was just at a commercial gym, and this kid was blown away. And like, I was in a bubble for a good reason. You know, like, I had kind of worked my way into this narrow thing, but it really does give some perspective when you realize just how many people are using strength training to just improve, or are at very different phases of their journey. And training in a place like that, and just honestly being anonymous, like, no one knows who I am. Like, I just put on my headphones, listen to some music, and have a good time. It's really been refreshing.
I mean, the bubble is important. Especially if you're at the top level, you need that. I'm not going to be the person to say you don't need that. You need that, and you probably need to be unbalanced. It is the way it is. You know, it's but it's still perspective of the other. You know, it's for the lifters that I've known that have been around as long as you have, at the level that you have, that never goes away. You know, so that, you know, it's like you go through the stages of grief. You know, it never goes away. So you just go through them. That'd be part with a lot of them. They just hate the sport. Like, that's it.
Resentment.
They just hate it. Then that's what I try to avoid with those other ones, is sometimes they're going through this before they even retire. Right. And you can see it. It's like, I see what's happening here. You know, they're beat up. They're stretching this as long as they can, like everybody kind of does. You know, they're stretching it, but they're finding all those reasons. And then if you can, I still deal with it. You know, if you can find a way to control your stupidity, you know, because there's still going to be stupid things you're going to want to do. And avoid I'll say what's worked for me.
Well, I really wanted to ask you. So I know I'm the one on the podcast, but
Yeah.
like I really wanted a little bit of like, you know, Dave Tate wisdom. Like you've been through this. You were a high level athlete, competing at a very high level athlete. Now not competing at a high level.
Yeah.
How was that process for you?
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible, because that's when I exited, it was, I don't like to say quit, right? But it is kind of quitting. I don't want to say retirement, because like retire from what? You know, it's not like we're like pros making, you know, it's not like it's a Louis thing. You said retire from what? You know, that kind of stupid shit. But it was, I had an injury, you know, a shoulder replacement I didn't want to have done. So I had that, and I could have just used that. And you know what? I might have just used that as the reason for a while. But there was also a business and a kid. There were other factors which to me weren't as important. Like if my shoulder was still working, I probably would have been more self-destructive, you know, at that point. And I saw that the results were getting less each year. The first thing was, where my first mistake was, I thought if I could just go into like a bodybuilding fat burning thing, let me just do that, because then I can keep that focus and that drive and just reposition it somewhere else. The reason I say that wasn't the smartest thing to do is because it takes more time. It takes more training. It takes, in a different way, more discipline. And so it really wasn't doing anything associated with the reasons why I walked.
Yeah.
You know, it might have been better for my shoulder, but it certainly wasn't better for my business. And it certainly wasn't better for, you know, my wife and kids.
Yeah.
You know, not in any way. But it was a way to avoid. The things that I did that were good is anything that I knew how strong I was, I avoided like the plague, because I did not want to do. It's been a decade
Comparison, right?
Yeah, I didn't want that.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm not going to do a floor press. If I'm going to do a floor press, it's going to be like all chain. Like, fuck the weight, just chain.
Yeah.
Something I have no idea, right? And then try to avoid training with people that were that much stronger than me, or they had to be way stronger.
Yeah.
So I couldn't gauge.
This all sounds so familiar. God, it sounds so familiar. I've been thinking the same exact things, you know, like I'm happy training with people that are so much stronger. I know the exact numbers that I'm capable of for a set of 1 down to a set of 8 for squatting, benching, and deadlifting. And it's so hard to think about like comparing myself to those numbers and stuff. So like, I totally get what you mean. Going back to something you said earlier, in that little bit of conversation, one thing that I felt that I really had to battle for a little while was the feeling of like quitting because I wasn't strong enough, like mentally strong enough. Like I don't have you're not done powerlifting. You just lost the motivation because you're weak, you know, like that kind of thing. Because my body's still capable. And I really had to think like, is that true? Do I really think that? No, I think I'm done for other reasons.
I thought that as well. And I knew it, right? Because I'm looking at lifters coming up that are younger and stronger. And, you know, part of me is like, am I just bowing out because of that? You know, and it's maybe, you know, it's definitely a part of it. Then that, out of all the other factors, the way I looked at that one is this one doesn't even matter, because I don't have control over this one.
Yeah.
They're still going to come in stronger than what I was.
It's true. Yeah.
You know, so if I can't control that one, then I don't care. These other ones I can control. Like how is my strength related to what it was before? Things like that. What part of training do I really love to do? Because the whole bodybuilding thing, it's fun. I have a background kind of in that. So like yourself, not major, but a few shows to be able to know beforehand how to train like a bodybuilder. But there's a reason why I quit doing it too, right? So it wasn't like this, oh my God, I can't wait to get back to it. I was like, oh my God, I got to do that now. Like this is the shit that I wanted to stop doing. And it worked for a while when I had John and, you know, people to train around that had the drive to be able to help him accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. So it wasn't about me. It was about how to be able to train hard enough to be able to push him to what he wanted to do. Yeah. But even with that, after a while, I was missing. I love doing heavy singles. So I was missing that. It doesn't have to be a barbell squat or a bench, but it's just that strain. I'm addicted to that.
Yeah.
You stand, you don't know, especially the squat, like you don't know if you're going to get it, but you do, or you might not, like you have that little doubt before the set, then you get mad, like what the fuck? Then you do that, so then it became, how can I structure that into my training in the safest way possible with the lowest risk and still be able to train. And I can't just do that because then you're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
So you got to find a balance. So it's the advice I have for people is it takes longer than you think. To think that drive is going to go away is very wrong.
Yeah.
It will always be there. Remembering it's a journey, right? So it's, I think it was with Mike Isertel yesterday where we were talking about this, is this whole thing. If I'm working with somebody that's, you're not in a catastrophic place, but it's in a catastrophic place, it would be more along the lines of, why did you do this in the first place? That philosophical question that I asked you about earlier, like, how do you get the people to say this? Because it's not because you wanted to break records. Right? You think it is, but it's not. Like, why did you want to break records? Like, what part of this whole thing kept you doing it for 13 years? Yeah. It's a long time. 13 years is a long ass time. It's a big chunk of your life. Yeah. Why? And that's a tough one.
It is.
Right? Now, it might be easier for a beginner because they don't really know. But you do it for decades. You're like, fuck, I don't know. And what I came up with after all this time of thinking is it's a process, a journey of mastery that I can go through, that I have more control over than anything else that I do in life. Yeah. Right. So there's still variables outside of your control in the training program, but there are a lot are in your control. Business, there's a lot of variables that are outside your control. A lot. I'm not saying you still need to strategically plan. You still need to do all these other things. It has to be done. But training, you control. Even your relationships, your wife, family, you can control some things, but a lot of that's outside of your control. Yeah. A lot of it's reactionary and stuff like that. Training is still to have, and I think for me, that's what it was, to have something in my life when everything else is kind of chaotic, that I can have some control over and have to think about. Like the things I want to do, even now with training, I can't just do it. It's like, okay, to do this, I'm going to have to go through this fucking thing here, this phase that I don't want to do, but I have to do that just to be ready to actually start to get ready to do the thing that I want to do. It's just phasic structure. I'm like, I got to lay this out to be able to do this. And the cool thing about doing it at this stage, I can move that. It's not like this has to happen on October 21st because that's the meet day. It's like, nah, this shit ain't going right.
Or I got some other stuff going on in my life.
Yeah, I need a couple more weeks here to kind of pivot away from this, but I can push this now a little later, which is so much healthier for your joints and mental health and all the other stuff.
It's even a form of auto-regulation, like in itself.
Huge, because now you don't have to beat the shit out of most of the powerlifting is accumulating fatigue, right? And then recovery, then going there and hopefully not beating the shit out of yourself that much to be able to get and display, your force at the best point. So it's, my answer was, what are the things that I can find that I have to train for that are going to take 12 months, like a year period. That are stretch goals, but not huge. And then associate those with, weight's been something I've been trying to work on, pretty much ever since post-retirement. So it may be the same thing that I want to do each year, but it's going to be 10 pounds lighter every single year. Right. So then now I'm hitting things at 245 that I was hitting at 280, but it's been a period of 6 years. So I still have the shiny thing. Yeah. Right. But it's a different shiny thing because it never was about the meat. And if you think about it, it probably never was about the meat. because the meat sucks. I mean, for me, it always did.
Mm-hmm.
Like all the other things mattered more. The meat was like, fuck. Because most of the time they don't go well. You know, like 1 out of every 3, it's like great.
Yeah.
But you're like, so it wasn't that, it was the journey.
It was a journey.
So how do I keep the journey and have a shiny enough thing that the journey can need enough discipline to satisfy what I'm really looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Take away the shiny thing, this journey becomes a clusterfuck. It becomes chaos.
Well, I want to say that, it's easy to think that like humans can just have this like perfect unending motivation in a vacuum. You can just kind of be like the stoic all the time. But I mean, we really are wired to do better when there is a goal at the end. There's even a psychology term around this called the goal gradient hypothesis. Like the closer you get to a goal, the more effort you apply toward that, toward that goal. And like the further you are away, the less effort you apply. So we want to have goals that are like the right spacing away from you to kind of have this consistent, like sustainable effort.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really are wired to do better when there is a goal. So it's not like we want to remove goals completely. Like you should never worry about goals. Like strength will come when it comes. I think setting reasonable goals helps motivate effort over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I'm in this like post-competition phase, thinking about like what kind of reasonable goals can I set that are different enough, but still give me that shiny feeling that you were talking about. It's a great term, by the way. Those are the things that I'm looking for. So you're in Elite FTS, and there are more barbells in here than I can possibly count. And one of the questions that I had as I was kind of walking around here is, do you think that since there's more variation here in exercise, in training styles and stuff like that, that keeps people motivated for longer because there's essentially like more small, shiny things that people can work on?
That depends on their personality.
Yeah.
Right. So now we're getting into if there's an optimal way to modify conjugate that will work for people who are really, really comfortable with uncertainty. Mm-hmm. Like a customer service position rep is probably very comfortable with uncertainty and not so much with certainty. Certainty would be like the accountant, somebody that wants to be able to do the same thing every single day, and this is what it's going to be. Yeah. Those personality archetypes or whatever they're called, they also fall into training. So now you take somebody that wants to have certainty. This is basically how it's supposed to look. Mm-hmm. And I'm very comfortable with that. And that would be sometimes where like Chico type stuff and same lifts 3 times a week. Fit them perfectly. Right. Mm-hmm. You put that personality archetype in conjugate, they're fucked, and vice versa.
Things change too often.
So if the other thing with changing too often is that can be a problem in itself, because then they never get acclimated to the change to even start to the movement to be able to start to display progress. Yeah. They just get acclimated. So it's getting I guess it is, but it's getting acclimated to a specific bar. Mm-hmm. You get better at it for the first couple of weeks. If you've never done it before. Is that progress? Or is it just becoming more balanced?
It's just skill. Yeah. You're just getting better at doing this particular lift. And by the time you figure it out, it's time to move on to the next exercise. Yeah. So
for a lot of people that do conjugate, I think that's one area they really fuck up, especially if they're beginners, because they're rotating too many things. Maybe in one week to get acclimated, if it's max effort, whatever it is, then another week to actually push it, and then some kind of structure, with it moving forward. So the answer is yes and no. It's a depends question, right? Where, there's it's more decoration. There'd be a problem. If you're trying to use every bar, then there's going to be a problem. Yeah. If they're strategically placed in, so squat, for instance, and if we wanted to build specificity going to a meet, that becomes a conversation there. Like, how many degrees of separation from specificity are we? Yeah. Is the coach allowed to work within? right? And is the athlete comfortable to work within?
Mm-hmm.
So if I define the comp lift is specificity,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's the comp lift. That's the walkout, the squat command, the bring back. So I'd 1 degree away,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what realm is everybody comfortable working in, right? You can get really far away, hack squat.
Sure. Yeah.
Really. And so is everybody comfortable working within that realm? Because at some point in time, I guess we could call everything specificity, because if you just want to forget the movement
Mm-hmm.
and just go under the tension of the muscle, you could say, well, it's the same time under tension. We're just,
And we have all these degrees of change that we can do. You know, we can modify the bar, we can modify the force curve, and
yes,
you know, all kinds of things.
Crazy. So it's with a lot of bars, I can go from safety squat bar, real high bar, you know, to probably just a high bar squat. Then I could go to a Mars bar, which is the weight's a little bit lower. Then I could go to a spider bar where the weight's going to be a little bit lower, you know, so now that specificity, you know, is basically moved further away, where I could flip it and then move it into the barbell, you know, going through.
Yeah.
And it's all based upon the plan of the programming. You know, having all those different bars in that long phase would probably be great if you had 48 weeks to train for the meet and somebody was really, really deconditioned and you had enough room to move that far away.
Yeah.
Most lifters aren't,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so it's kind of getting in your world, you know, where you're working. How many times a year do you try to have your lifters compete?
Early lifters can compete if they want to, like 4 times a year, something like that.
Yeah. So there's only so many degrees that you're going to be able to work away.
Yeah.
So with that, where would you have them start? So let's say the meet ended. It's easier for people to understand that.
Yeah.
So the meet ends. How does the training progress from the lifter then?
Well, it's a good chance to talk about like what is, I don't know, what's the default for drug-free powerlifting? Like if I had to put an archetype on that for what the standard now for what most IPF lifters are doing, standard is probably like squatting 2 or 3 times a week. This is all like highly specific. And if not a comp squat, it's either a high bar, a pause, or a safety bar or something like that. Like very close. No accommodating resistance, you know, straight weight, comp shoes, comp belts, you know, all that kind of stuff. Same with bench. Maybe the variation is close grip or more paused or Larson or something like that. Feet up. And then deadlifting once or twice per week, either comp if you're sumo, comp if you're conventional. Maybe you're doing paused work or RDLs or something like that on the other day. And you surround that core with a little bit more bodybuilding work, essentially, you know, heavy compound stuff, to kind of round out your muscular development. So that's essentially the formula. And I think a lot of athletes, and most athletes that I train, operate in that formula.
How do you progress that leading into the meet?
We change repetitions and we change like how heavy things are. So further out from competition, perhaps things are a little bit lighter. There's less stuff that's either above 90% or RP 8, 9, and 10, or let's say 8.5, 9, and 10 are reserved for a little bit closer to competition. The reps start to drop a little bit. Those are the main variables that I adjust. I find that, you know, if I find a frequency that's successful for athletes, like this many times per week that you're doing the lifts, that's kind of like the formula. And maybe the exercises change. Maybe the order changes, but I really try to keep them doing the lifts that often because of skill development, and each exercise slot kind of serves as like a range of 3 to 5 sets that the athlete is doing. So I try not to adjust that too much. I find that if I, you know, give an athlete an extra day per week of doing a movement, that's like a very heavy-handed hammer of an adjustment for someone to do.
How do you anchor the RPE so that they're on the same page as what you're on?
Well, I have them record video, so maybe they're wildly wrong the first few weeks or something like that. And we just kind of go through a few examples like, really, you call that an RP7? Like, you nearly missed that rep, you know? Or the opposite can be true sometimes. Like you call that an RP8, but like you could have done 9 more reps, I promise you, if you just applied yourself and do a little bit more effort, you know? So like RPE, yes, it's subjective. Yes, ultimately the person is the only one who can tell like what it is, but there's a very large period of learning where you have to kind of figure out what you're capable of. And I think some kind of teaching moments of you just like really applying yourself and trying can teach you a lot about like how much you can really apply yourself, you know, to kind of help with RPE. So it's really kind of trial and error.
Well, with that as well, there's, do you assess their, what I want to say, mental psych? I mean, because they can go into a set in a different mental state than a different mental state, and that can greatly impact that RPE. Mm-hmm. So do you discuss where you want that to be? It's certain, I guess, in certain blocks of training.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll write in, I think I might be the first person to use this, but sometimes I call like a soft RPE 7, which basically is like a no hype RPE 7 or something. All that means is like, you know, don't think about your dead dog, or, you know, don't think about, you know, crushing your opponent with the weight on the sumo deadlift. Let's just go in there. Let's do the weight and let's move on.
I'm sorry. I kind of didn't hear anything after the dead dog thing. So it is. So you are accounting for it, which is, I think that's a great thing, because it's, if I look at pros and cons of RPE, that's one of the bigger ones. It's like, okay, this is weird. Like, how do you apply it in this case? Yep. And then how do you apply it for bodybuilding sets? You know, that becomes another weird case there. Yeah. But there's room for error.
Yeah. I mean, even in bodybuilding, I can think of doing like a set of 10, and I've done this where like my dad used to train with me all the time, and I would tell him like you have to push me during this leg extension set of 10, and, you know, like, okay, you know, here we go. Or like, you know, maybe the rep count is variable, and like, you know, okay, do 3 more. All right. Do 2 more. All right. That was good. Do 2 more. Like, okay, now really work for it, you know, and you realize how much more you have in you. And those are wonderful teaching moments in themselves, but it really does go to like this link between like outcome and weight on the bar or number of reps or something like that, and mental state. There's this pure link between those two things. And if you just don't have the mental state sometimes, and you're a high level athlete and you're trying to load something crazy, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. It's on the other side of that is we all do this because we're mentally fucked up in some way, right? So there's going to be those sets that you're going to do that you try to keep reined in, but you're not, you know. So it could be the set that you know is supposed to be a triple, but you're like, fuck this. You think about the dead dog, and then you do 6 or 7. Oh yeah. I don't think you necessarily want to discourage that, but you have to account for it, which means other, you know, future training sessions may have to be compromised, or the accessories for the day, just you're done, go. How do you work with clients on that?
You're absolutely right. Like, you don't want to discourage that. I think it's a gift to be able to put yourself in that place. You know, like, there's sometimes what's called like a dark why, you know, like I think sometimes people motivate themselves from a very kind of like dark, desperate like place. Really common in powerlifting. People get into powerlifting because they were bullied, or, you know, bad things are going on in their life, and powerlifting is their escape. And that becomes some of their motivation for getting through difficult sessions or applying themselves. It's not a bad thing. I would tend to treat that as a tool to use. And just like all tools, it needs to be used for specific circumstances. You know, so if you're able to access that essentially, like, it's a pool of energy. If you're able to access that pool of energy, great. We just don't need that all the time. You know, so like, let's pull out that special stopper just when we need it and not when we don't.
Yeah, that would be one aspect of what we were talking about before, is when you're coming off that back end and on the other side, still needs to be implemented to some degree. You know, so that's the stupid shit that I talk about. Like, you got to have the stupid shit, but in a controlled way that doesn't lead to injury. Same thing with, you know, meat training. You don't want it to lead to injury, but as you get older, the likelihood that it could lead to injury increases just for that fact. And the training age compiles. Let's take a bathroom break real quick, then we'll come back and jump back in.
Sounds good.
Today's episode is brought to you by Element, a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything that you need and nothing that you don't. In other words, no sugar, no artificial coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, and no BS. With Element, I love the watermelon. The watermelon tastes freaking awesome. I drank 1 pack every day, no matter what. People that train out here, it's sitting out here for them all the time. The boxes don't last very long. Right now, Element is offering Table Talk listeners a free sample pack with any purchase. That's 8 single serving packages free with any Element order. Get yours at drinkelement.com/Table Talk. The deal is only available through the link in the description. The other thing is, if you don't like it, you can just give it away to a salty friend and Element will give you a 100% refund. No risk, money back guarantee. Head over to drinkelement.com/Table Talk. I want to let you guys know that we just had a limited edition drop on the website last week of new items that sweatshirt, flannel, t-shirts, shorts. Basically, the limited edition items are the items that directly support the Table Talk podcast. So if you go to elitefts.com/limited edition, or actually just the link in the description, you can find the limited edition items that we have now, which there's the one that I like the best is the shit suck good great, which is all emojis. The designs I always like the best, right? They're the ones that don't sell for shit, but they're the ones that I want to wear that I like the best. And there's the cigar one as well. And they're all there on the screen for you guys to be able to see. So if you go to elitefts.com/limited edition, the other thing that directly helps support the podcast that I haven't talked that much about is the Table Talk crew. The Table Talk crew is extra edition episodes that go out once a month. The content of those episodes are AMA related, question related, that come from the Table Talk Discord group, which is also part of being in the crew. When you're in the crew, there's dozens of ebooks that are in there. There's every seminar that we've ever done is put on there. There's courses that are put on there. There's series that have put on there. The original YouTube channel that we had for many years before we migrated to the newer one, all that old content is on there. There's discussion groups for just general training, fitness, life, nutrition, basically everything that you can think of is on. So just go look at what that is, or better than that, just go to the description, click on join the crew. That helps directly support the podcast, which is how we're able to keep this thing rolling. All right, guys, we're back. Couple things that I forgot to mention from the onset of the podcast were we have new limited edition items. I think there is a commercial for the limited edition that we run, or an ad that we run during the podcast. It's a little outdated. We got two more t-shirts that we added. One I'm wearing now. One was an outlaw one, and the third one should be in before we actually launch this podcast, which I probably shouldn't have just said that because this podcast is launched, right? So anyhow, authentic is what we're being. And the Discord, or the crew, I want to talk a little bit more about that. What we got going on with the crew now is when you join the crew, you get the extra podcast episode each month, which is the Q&A episode, where those questions come directly from the crew members. What the crew members are is it's a Discord server, Discord community, kind of like a forum that doesn't suck, if you know what forums are, because it's controlled and there's only so many members that are associated with that. But in this Discord forum, we have different discussion threads with everything related to strength training that you would be interested in. One of the sample threads, I believe they're going to post on our Instagram, because it just came up the other day, which was awesome to actually watch, because we do have Seth Alberson in there, and they were talking about something related to upper back injury type situation. So they were addressing it from multiple angles, which is part of something that happens on the Discord server every day, as well as form checks and training logs and all kinds of other crap that I'm forgetting right now. But it's a great community that's out there. The other thing that we're working on right now is a couple times a year, we're going to have a training group, a training session out here at Elite FTS, which is going to be by invitation only. That is only going to be sent out to the members of the crew. So if you're not part of the crew, you're not going to be able to sign up for that. We're going to limit it to, I think we're talking about 20 to 30 attendants that will be able to come out, train for the whole weekend, have barbecue, shoot the shit, stuff like that. I believe the date that we're looking at is somewhere in late August. That will actually launch sometime before the end of the month, and it will go just to the crew server. I want to say crew server. Okay, done with the commercials. Oh, we also just got in the Summer Breeze ammonia salt, which we'll try here in a minute. That they're not on the site yet. They may not be on the site when this posts either. This one here, when we made it, what I suggested, because we have different scents, I want to say flavors all the time, but they're different scents. What I suggested here is that because it's a Summer Breeze, I want it to have like the smell of Febreze, like fabric softener, but then mix it with that song by Typo Negative, Summer Breeze.
Okay.
So that were the directions when I had this made. Do you use salts?
I don't use salts.
All right, so these are not, it's not bad.
Yeah.
It's just right. It's not like burn your nose and make you want to cough.
Like just right. Or maybe it did actually.
Yeah, it's just, this is nice.
All right.
It's not, we make way harder shit. We had dark side.
When it leafed it.
Yeah, that's not bad. See, it's like fabric softener, right? Like summer night, totally. Summer day.
Just like fabric softener.
Well, now that we're a little bit more awake, I want to get into one of the topics that you sent us was sports psychology, and some of this we talked about. What I added to this was the identity part, which I kind of jumped to the end. But some of the things that you had on your list here, which I think are really important to talk about, is burnout, perfectionism, a lot of things that are associated with actually a lifter coming into the sport and maturing through the sport, because this is a part of it all the way through. And it also ties into what many will call mindset, which becomes like, what's that mean? You know, so I like how your topic ideas, you broke this down. So let's just, if you would normally discuss this, where would you jump off at?
We could start with, let's see, we had burnout.
Burnout, perfectionism.
We could start with perfectionism because that essentially feeds into burnout as well. I think you find people on like these polar opposites when it comes to perfectionism. So like, we'll just kind of talk about the pros. Like perfectionism is essentially how I got good. Not me, but someone could argue like this is how I got good, was trying to make things as good as possible in every area of my life. Let me manage my nutrition perfectly. Let me sleep a perfect number of hours. Let me track everything. Let me make sure my technique is perfect. And then other people who say a lot of the research shows like perfectionism is tied to early rates of burnout, stopping the sport early, devaluing the sport. And so how do we square these two things? Like it's both good and bad. And I think it comes down to, so perfectionistic striving is fine. Dwelling on the negatives, dwelling on the times where you weren't perfect is when it comes to be a problem. So essentially, if you continue to strive for excellence, that's great. That's healthy. That's perfectly fine. When you dwell on all the times where you weren't perfect, dwell on all the times when you made mistakes and errors and let that consume you, that becomes problematic.
So one way to look at that is to be forward looking.
Yeah.
Compared to looking in the past.
Yeah, exactly. So it's either aiming for the positive or avoiding the negative. Does that make sense? So like aiming for the positive is great. Avoiding the negative, like don't mess up kind of attitude, is what we want to avoid in athletes. Kind of
getting what you're saying, but not. Because if we're looking at perfectionism, I guess where this becomes hard is you got to, funny, right? You got an imperfect word for perfection.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, really think about it. You have an imperfect word because with that perfectionism, there's so many variables that you really can't perfect all of them.
It's true.
Or they become, as you've learned being in the game for so long, there's so many more variables that you didn't even know of when you started, which becomes overwhelming. So over a period of time, you're like, I can't control all these. You have to control the ones that you can. Where I'm having a hard time is if somebody's new coming into it, they don't know what those ones are that they can control. I think I'm walking myself to what you're saying right now, where you can help shine the light on the ones that they should control.
Yeah.
Then the ones that they shouldn't control would be the ones that are actually the ones that you're talking about. You shouldn't, the backwards ones, like striving for
Yeah, exactly.
perfection.
You also mentioned another useful term from sports psychology, and it's called locus of control. So when something good or bad happens, how much personal responsibility do you feel for that? Like if you have a good competition, how much control do you feel you have over the outcome of that good competition? Maybe the wrong competitors or the right competitors just didn't show up and you just kind of got lucky. That would be like I didn't earn this. I just kind of got lucky. Or, the other person just happened to miss their third deadlift and it's kind of just all out of my control. Or you did really well in a training session. You could just kind of shift all the success to things outside your control. So, it's kind of you can have people take tests. In sports psychology, the instrument is really like a survey. There's surveys for everything. There's surveys for your scale of perfectionism, your scale for locus of control, scale for attachment to sport, scale for burnout. There's tests for everything. And if you just kind of look, you can find one and you can download it and take it and find out, where you specifically rank, or if we want, we can attach some to this podcast. But locus of control ends up being really important too. Athletes who are better attached to their sport have a higher locus of control, both for successes and for failures. So essentially just feeling like they have more personal responsibility in the outcomes for various decisions, but in a realistic way. So not taking responsibility for things that they truly have no control over. But when things do go well, feeling like, yes, I caused this to go well because I applied myself for, months of effort. And as a result, I can feel better about the outcome because there's a direct attachment between my effort and what actually happened.
Yeah. You brought up an interesting thing where you can win a meet because things didn't go right for other people and then think that you didn't earn it. That kind of stuck with me when you said that, because I can definitely see that, but you still did, right? Because those are they are controlling the strategic variables associated with the meet. Where I've always tried to get lifters to not use the meet is an indicator of how well the training for the meet went. Now it's an indicator for how the meet went, right? And if the goal is to be a world champion, you have to learn how to compete to win, which is different. Yeah. But I've seen from the training side, a bad meet off a great training cycle, shit didn't go well. Weight cut, something just didn't go well.
Yeah.
Then they change everything. It's just like, what the hell? Or the meet went really well off a bad training cycle, which typically is how it happens in most of the cases. Yeah. Or they don't do a meet because the training cycle didn't go really well. So I'm not going to be worth a shit. And they don't know that, they could be. So they're almost two different entities. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah. There are, someone has a really bad week of training sessions, or, we need to hit a certain number in squats to kind of feel like we have a good grasp on being able to move forward. And okay, well, we're going to be able to load a PR on the platform or something like that. It just doesn't happen in training. And someone can feel like, I just don't want to do it. We've got to pull out from the competition, just do another competition. typically like there's all kinds of negative baggage associated with that, feelings of failure, feelings of like, not only did I not progress, but I will never progress, you know, kind of like these catastrophic feelings as well of like, this is kind of like the end and stuff. And I've found both for myself as an athlete and for working with athletes as well, that that's one of the primary, so backing up a little bit, honestly, like sports psychology, even though it doesn't look like sports psychology, is like the primary goal and the primary use of a good coach. You know, like a good coach earns their money, earns their keep when they're able to pull athletes back from the brink, talk with athletes about some of this deep stuff about motivation, keep them on the straight and narrow path, you know, bounce back after a major setback, like some of these kind of like coming to Jesus moments, you know, where you're able to like dig deep and really kind of regain that athlete's sense of self-confidence. Like that's one of the best things about being a coach, is kind of like those moments. And as an athlete myself, those are some of the times where I've felt, you know, the most trust and value in my own coach, is kind of like those times where he's been able to help me.
Can you think of a specific moment that comes to mind?
Yeah. There's quite a few. There's one time going into IPF Worlds in 2017, in the training cycle leading up to that, where I tweaked something in my back. It was really bad. Like I couldn't deadlift like over 315 without pain. And like if I had some ibuprofen, I could, but it was just kind of like maybe 3-4 weeks out. And like, this is the time when training's supposed to be heavy. You're supposed to be like kicking ass and things are supposed to be moving well. And like, I just couldn't train. And like, I just kind of like just sat down like under these stairs at this gym and just kind of cried and kind of felt like, how am I going to go to my first world championship and, you know, be a respectable athlete? Should this spot be, you know, should I just pull out and give this spot to another US athlete who can, you know, represent the United States better than me? And my coach was kind of just really able to kind of like pull back the reins and essentially just decrease the temperature, which is one of the first steps when something feels catastrophic like this, is how can we kind of like step back from the emotion of the situation a little bit, analyze things a little bit more, I don't know, methodically, take the emotion out of it and then make a plan going forward. And that's exactly what we did. And ended up being fine ultimately. But in the moment, it felt like the world is ending. I'm done powerlifting. Mm-hmm. Like, this is it.
Have you ever had it end up being better than fine? A situation like that?
Yeah.
What was that story?
So there's other times where I'm honestly, like, thinking back, some of my biggest PRs have been unplanned. Mm-hmm. That always feels like difficult as a coach. You know what I mean? Like,
I know, that's why I want to ask about
it. Like, as a coach myself, like, you know, I plan out all these variables specifically. So like, you're going to be peaked on this specific day. And someone is like, hey, you know, coach, I had a really good weekend and went, you know, a little heavier than expected. And, you know, we PR'd a squat by 30 pounds or something like that. Fuck. Great. I'm really happy for you. It's great. So I'm glad things are going well. Yeah, it certainly happens all the time. I would much rather that happen than the other case.
Yeah.
Where someone just doesn't make progress at all. Like I'm happy progress happens whenever. And I think honestly, powerlifting coaches these days, they beat up on going off program more than they should. You know, like the program is really a guide for athletes. You know, it's a guide based on best case information, the information that we have. But if athletes feel good and go up more than expected and, you know, it's not catastrophic, I feel fine about that. You know, I don't feel like they betrayed me or like they betrayed the plan or like they don't know what they're doing. Sometimes it can serve as a teaching moment, but I mean, by and large, like I both let athletes go like off program a little bit and celebrate them when things go well.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes with one of the benefits to conjugate, and I obviously have a bias there, right? So but I also understand the shortfalls and the pros and cons of other things too, where what you're saying is a way to accommodate what I think are some of the shortfalls of other training methodologies, is that increase, that PR or whatever it was, it may not be strength. They just may have finally figured out how to brace right. Mm-hmm. And that one little change alone accounted for a 30-pound PR. But another way to think about it was they always had that strength. They just weren't able to display it. And now they can. Where if they're not, I'm picking my words carefully because people listen to it. If they're not allowed to go off plan to discover that, then that whole training phase for that meet could have been shortfalled by a 50-pound PR. But as you know, if they do that all the time, and it isn't for the cases that we're talking about, they overreach and then it ends up being a complete clusterfuck.
Yeah.
So they need experience if it's the athlete themselves to be able to know what's going on. Like if it's yourself personally, you've had cases where you're like, okay, this feels really good. It's all in the groove. Nothing hurts. I really don't know what the fuck is going on, but I'm going to ride this just a little bit to see.
Yeah.
Then you're like, holy shit, I think, because the strength isn't as linear as people think. It's like steps.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I made that step, but then you're also cognizant enough. I need to pay more attention. Next training session, was it, you know what I'm saying? So now if it's an athlete you're working with, you have to guide them through that, you know, because they're going to, and this is why I wanted to go down this road is sometimes that can change your training methodology completely. Like for me, there was a time I realized I didn't have to pull, 14 days out. Actually 21 days out, I did way better. And it was just by accident. But then you go to me like, what the fuck just happened? Like, oh shit, was it that? Because if it wasn't, I don't want to do the other thing and shortfall. But then after like twice, like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
Then it changes that. Other times, what athletes will do is they essentially deload it as you would before a meet. So they skipped a couple workouts. They went on vacation or whatever. They came out, they killed a training session. Yeah. Like, coach, I'm way stronger. And you're like, dude, no. You just did what we do the last 10 days before a meet. You super compensated and hit this as well. Yeah. Were there any cases that changed the way that you thought about your own training methodology?
Absolutely. And in other athletes training in both sides of that extreme. So specifically when it comes to like peaking and how can we express maximal performance, it's like my default is to have heavy lifts be anywhere from like 7 to 13 days out from a competition. Like within that week before the competition, to have heavy lifts, to like maybe doing openers the week of a competition or something in that range. I've had cases where athletes need to be training pretty heavy, pretty close to the competition. So essentially the training close to a competition looks just like normal training. Maybe we drop a set off or something like that, but the loads are pretty similar and those athletes do really well. For me, one of these teaching moments for me that went the other direction was I did a competition and then, the week after the competition, not really train much. The week after that, maybe train a little bit. And then like on a Friday, almost 2 weeks after the competition, I'm doing like a mess around deadlift workout and like, I feel great and just kept going up. And that was the first time I deadlifted 805. And it's moments like that where I'm like, man, this really, like, I have to question my assumptions here about like what peaking is and like how close to a competition I need to do something. And I wish that there was a way to figure this out more than trial and error. But oftentimes you just need experience of doing this because truly everyone is different when it comes to this kind of stuff. Yes, we can find patterns. Typically, I think when athletes have stronger deadlifts, they can pull the deadlift back from competition away a little bit further because perhaps heavy deadlifts take a toll on the body that has a longer tail of recovery. So maybe you just need to pull it back a little bit. And I think bench press, you can probably do a little bit closer to the competition because even heavy benches don't really tax you too much. But, even those like general patterns aside, there's so much individuality here that you just kind of have to experience to be able to make some adjustments from. And then we test it out tentatively. Maybe the first time like we actually try this as a strategy, it's into like a training max, not into a competition. Okay, well, it works there. Great. Now we'll use it in a competition.
Have you found a difference with beginners?
Yeah. So beginners, especially like early beginners, they can just go heavy quite often. You really don't need like a traditional taper, where you need to like get rid of all this fatigue, because there really isn't a whole lot of like systemic fatigue overall. Like you can just like do all 3 of your openers the Monday before a competition, do the competition shit. Maybe even the week after the competition, you'll be able to PR again.
Yeah. No, I found the same thing. That's why I'm asking, because I've also found that if you do try, their confidence drops because they actually think they're going to get weaker. And it's like, oh man, that's, we'll have that conversation later, but right now, because that's what you think, and there isn't that much systemic fatigue. Yeah. It's that. I've even had some weird ones a couple of times where just full multiply. So not raw, just full multiply, putting the gear on 5 times in the last 2 weeks for all lifts. Wow. Because the confidence was just a fucking mess. It's like, okay, I understand the shortfalls here, but the biggest shortfall is bombing out. Yeah. So maybe we lift less weight, but at least to get through the meet. But you have to be able to figure all this crap out. And this is the most optimal thing that you have to do right now. And that's where that individualistic thing comes in. Yeah. And the stronger they get, the more experience they get, it gets a little tricky, but the confidence is such a big factor that plays into that. Yeah, it is. There's kind of 2 things I'm thinking about here. One is like, especially with equip lifting or like, probably just equip lifting, you can train heavy raw, and then closer to competition, you start putting on the equipment, and you walk this line of balance that we talked about a little bit earlier on, where you're maybe in equipment, like, I don't know, 7 times before a competition, maybe even less. And then you stop like pretty early before competition, maybe 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out or something. I can imagine like a whole series of doubt, like, how ready am I? I have no way to tell right now, because I can't put on equipment now. So you just kind of have to trust that things are going to be okay in the competition. And that trust piece is scary as hell. It's the same thing with some of these athletes in, on the raw powerlifting side that have like normal training for like the 4, 3, maybe even 2 days out from competition. I have to trust like, all right, I'm not going to have fatigue. I'm going to be able to perform in the competition just fine. And I think all this doubt comes from the fact that we have this established pattern of what like a peak typically looks like, and you're deviating from that, and you think like, am I the exception to the rule? Maybe we just have to realize that there's more variability than we think, like maybe not everyone actually peaks the same way, or the other way to think about it is maybe it just doesn't matter as much. I think the key thing you said there is we have this established pattern that you're funny where this is going to go, where you're looking at what's happened in the past, which you just said is the thing that you don't want to like do. Yeah. So you're looking what's in the past to kind of use that as a predictive mechanism for the future, but it isn't really the case. Where on the extreme side of that, before I came to Westside, I had like a decade competitive experience, and 7 of the years in elite total or above. So I knew what I was doing. I'm not going to say I was great at what I was doing, but I was qualified for nationals and so forth. So I knew what I was doing, and it was all linear, progressive overload. But the way the gear was introduced was I'd start, whole off season raw, whatever you want to call off season. And then you'd start with just briefs, and then it'd be like briefs and wraps. And each week you just add a little more, probably kind of how single ply still does it now. Yeah. Just add a little bit more as the meat comes in. The last peak phase, triples, singles, you'd have pretty much full gear and then go, but you're getting accustomed to the gear. I get to Westside and fucking Louis like, we don't wear any gear ever. And I'm like, ever? Like, no, just briefs on dynamic day. Ever? Like, no. So it's like a belt. And I'm like, well, what the fuck? You go to the meet and you put it on. This is the honest to God truth. So I went from this, like easing into the whole thing to, no, we don't wear our shit until you go to the meet. Yeah. Like, how do you even pick your opener? Like, how do you know? Well, you just go You know, second attempt, 5 pounds more than your PR. How the fuck do I know what that is?
Yeah.
You know, if my PR is 800 pounds and I haven't lifted anything over 650 in the gym for all year, my second's going to be like 805. And so what the fuck is the opener? You know, and so we'd put it on to see if it fit. That was it. And that was the squat suit, wraps and shit like that. All that just there. And the bencher, we started putting it on a little bit earlier, but for most of my time there, we never used the gear. Then we go to the meet, put it on. The first time freaked me the fuck out.
Yeah.
In a big way. Did not go well either.
Yeah.
Now the second time it went better. You know, then after that, I was acclimated to it. But long term, I think it was a shortfall because we gave up a lot.
Yeah.
You know, as the gear, maybe when I came in, you could get away with it because the gear wasn't gangster or whatever they want to call it. You weren't getting as much out of the gear. Yeah. So I could probably get away with it. But as it got more carryover out of it, then you don't know how to use the carryover.
It's a practice
you're just putting
skill
shit on. It's like, who gives a shit how strong I am raw if it was going in there? But I came in with that paradigm of this is how everybody else does this. And then why the fuck are you not? That was the first problem. Like, please explain to me why this is not happening. And then why is everybody else still doing it? And then after it didn't work, it became more of a problem. Like, how come it worked for everybody else, but not me? Yeah. And then how much of it was, you know, mental that kind of played into it. But it's, had I not had that back paradigm.
You were anchored to like this past strategy.
Yeah. So the lifters that would come in without a powerlifting background had no problem. That's what messed with my head in a big way, because that showed me it was in my head. You know, and that fucks with me. Things like that bothered me a lot. Yeah. Right. Because it's like, now this is in my control, but it's not, but it is, you know, that kind of crazy ass thing. Yeah. Where the next thing you had on your list, this can lead into the burnout. So let's say the burnout, overreaching, or whatever people want to call that. Let's say that hits, you know, how did you manage it yourself? And then how do you manage it for the clients? I had,
I'd say 2018 or 2019, I kind of went through like this spell of burnout. And number one, I researched a lot about this just because I'm really interested in psychology. So I kind of wanted to look at like, what does the psychology research say on this? Burnout kind of has like these three main components in like the definition of like athlete burnout. One is like a detachment from sport. One is like a devaluation of the sport. So like it just means less to you. And one is like physical and mental exhaustion, you know, just kind of like a lack of being able to put out the same effort that you did before. The reasons for burnout are like vast and varied and can come from a lot of different places because the athletic identity is so interconnected to a lot of other things. You know, let's imagine that things are going fine and then your coach decides to like stop coaching, or everything's fine and then you get injured, or everything's fine and then you have to move to a different gym and you're no longer training the same gym, or you have a kid with your family. Like any one of these things can cause a massive disruption in your life and can reduce some of those things that we talked about before. So how do we address this? Well, first, like, you know, as much as we can, we identify like, what do we think the cause of this burnout was? And then how can we find a way to make fitness a better part of your life and kind of slowly work our way back toward things feeling a little bit more normal. So reducing the temperature is one thing. I think a dramatic change in training can be a really refreshing way of getting people to like fall back in love with training. You know, training can feel, especially for like raw powerlifting, very monotonous, very much the same. We talked about high specificity earlier. We talked about, you know, comp squatting, comp benching, comp deadlifting, and just like this cycle of training over time kind of being fairly predictable. And sometimes like just throwing a wrench in that can be great. You know, let's get you away from the barbell. Let's train different. Maybe during that time you start to miss the barbell again, and you feel like, man, I really want to squat. That's a great sign, that you're kind of like feeling a little bit more normal and kind of like, oh yeah, you like squatting and we took that away from you. Great. Well, maybe when we bring it back, you'll start to feel a little bit better. And it gives you new things to focus on during that period of time. You set new goals. Maybe you're just in a different training space as well. We stop like being so meticulous about tracking things. We have you do a little bit of journaling about, like identity and some of the stuff we talked about before. All these things can help too. Sometimes there are elements of burnout that come from either aspects of motivation, which I'll bring up in a second, but entrapment, which I'll bring up now. It's the sense that like you have to train, or you have to compete, or you have to stay with a coach, or you have to stay at a certain gym. Essentially, like you're being stuck in a specific spot. And you can imagine that leading to a sense of a lack of control and a lack of, an increased sense of burnout as a result from that. So that really has to come up in a conversation. Why are you feeling like this? Do you feel like you have a say in various aspects, or do you feel kind of stuck? And maybe through conversation, we can work our way through that. So in motivation broadly, there's 3 pillars to like self-determination in theory, which is like, how we're intrinsically motivated. One is autonomy. That's the degree that you feel like you have control over various aspects of your training, of your decision-making, of when you do competitions, all that kind of stuff. One is competence, like to feel that you are good at your sport, to feel that your training is appropriately difficult, that you're getting better over time. It's essentially like how good you feel you are at your sport. And the last is relatedness. This is the degree to which you feel like you connect with other people over your sport, your community, your coach, your parents, your gym partners, all that stuff. So if any one of these 3 main pillars is reduced, then motivation is reduced and athletes can feel an increased threat to burnout.
Are there chemical associations with this? So when you're going into neural aspects, it's nutritional deficiencies. I've seen some people, where I'm going with this, because I'm getting a little bit out of my wheelhouse here. Some people will address this with different supplementation and things like that. I don't want to say adrenal fatigue and shit like that. Yeah. But basically they'll say that, and I would agree with this, once they hit the things that you're talking about, it's really too late. Like they want to avoid hitting those things in the first place. Yeah. Because to come out of the hole that you're talking about, it's going to take way longer than the things that they should have done to avoid getting in the hole in the first place. Yeah. Do you know anything around that aspect? So the chemical aspect.
So overtraining is like the physical piece of like you trained past the point that you can recover from, and now you're just like screwed for 6 months or something like that as you work your way back. That's been redefined now as underperformance syndrome, because like the reasons for like essentially there's not a direct link between training volume and overtraining. Some people can manage training volume just fine, and there's a lot of like other factors going on there. While that's a piece of burnout for sure in other sports, I think the training volume is just too low in powerlifting to really get at that sense. Yeah. For that specific piece, I can think of running, gymnastics, boxing, like these other sports with crazy high volumes as being a much more direct path there than for powerlifting, where we sit like 80% of our workouts. You know what I mean?
I understand. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense there. You have mental toughness in here, which is, how do you define that? I mean, so what context are you framing that?
Yeah. So mental toughness is, it's a really interesting thing to me, because there was this book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. And so I read some of that book, and she links it to like various character traits like conscientiousness, which is like one of like the big 5 personality traits. And there's a sense that like you either have it or you don't. Like this is kind of just baked into who you are. And some people are more mentally tough and others aren't. Of course, there are links to experiences that you've had and how that forms the person that you end up becoming, and even certain genetic character traits that we just really don't know about, other than kind of like these survey questions that can get us a little bit closer. But one of the most interesting pieces from sports psychology that I've looked at is it's a survey of Olympic athletes. So this group surveys a bunch of Olympic athletes across different sports and comes up with these 12 characteristics that came up in repeated conversations with some of these athletes. And if it's cool, I'll kind of pull out this. It'll take me a second to look this up. All right, here we go. So they had them rank them in order of importance too. So like, which of these character traits do you think is the most important as like a defining characteristic for mental toughness? Number one is having an unshakable self-belief in your ability to achieve your competition goals. So, whatever it is, like you have what it takes to make it to the top. Number two is,
or you believe you have what it takes.
You believe what it takes. Exactly. Number two, bouncing back from performance setbacks as a result of increased determination to succeed. So this kind of feeds into locus of control that we talked about before. Number three, having an unshakable self-belief that you possess unique qualities and abilities that make you better than your opponents. So this is thinking that there's something special about being you that's different from being other athletes. And that special thing is your reason for why you're going to succeed. I am more capable because when I fail, I just get right back up and keep trying. But
wouldn't that be what was before?
I'm tenacious.
I mean, that would be the same thing. That example would be the same thing as what you listed before, being able to come back basically from adversity. Yeah.
So another reason for belief might be something different, though. It might be like, I have to train at 6 a.m. every day because that's my schedule, and no one else is willing to get up at 6 a.m. to train, but I am. Yeah. Number four, having an insatiable desire and internalized motives to succeed. Number five, remaining fully focused on the task at hand in the face of competition-specific distractions. So you're able to kind of like stay more focused than other people. Regaining control following unexpected, uncontrollable events. Pushing back the boundaries of physical and emotional pain while still maintaining technique and effort under distress. So you can kind of like go there to that place that other people can't. Accepting that competition anxiety is inevitable and knowing that you can cope with it. Thriving on the pressure of competition. Not being adversely affected by other people's good or bad performances. Remaining focused in the face of personal life distractions. And finally, being able to switch on and off sport focus as needed. It's a good list. And I thought, damn, I don't have all these things, but I want to get them. That's a list that I could really strive to achieve.
Yeah, that is. When I hear mental toughness, the first thing that goes through my head is it's situational. Like, give me the situation. What does that mean? Because, I can show you somebody that you think's mental tough, but I can put them in a different situation and they're not.
Yeah.
Maybe they're mental tough in a meet, but I put them in a business situation and they crumble like that.
Yeah.
Or they're mentally tough in one situation, but yet they can't even control, simple things in their own life. So mental toughness in sport is different than mental toughness in other realms. Yeah. But I think that if you can develop it in sport, you can apply it to other realms. Yeah. Because not easily applied, but applied because you know what it is. It's one of the main reasons I started the company was I do believe most of the things you learn in the weight room can apply to everyday life if you break it down into those factors. Yeah. Some things don't. I didn't have enough foresight to know that there are some things that don't. Selfishness. There's a lot of things associated with the sport that really don't apply in other situations, but maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. That list, though, where was that list from?
From a study in 2008 on Olympic athletes.
Okay. What I like about that is it exposes to all of us, where work can be put in. Right. So now the one that stuck out to me was the ability to perform in adverse conditions. Right. That's going to just come with experience. And I mean, to me, that's the ability to perform a squat in a meet when it's shit's cramping. Right. And you're like, fuck, you don't know what's going on, but you've been there enough times to know, you know what, I just need to go out and do what I know how to do.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen or it's not, but more than likely it's going to happen. Been here.
Yeah.
That takes experience, time, repetitions, and so forth. And it starts with learning how to do a body weight squat as a kid correctly. You can't go from the body weight squat to that situation, as fast as people would like.
Yeah.
That's skill acquisition is essentially what it is.
Yeah.
And it belongs on that list because a big part of that is mental. Because a lot of people can squat really, really great as long as you're cueing them everything to do. And then after that, they need to cue themselves to do it. And then after that, they have to just automatically do it.
Yeah. There's a great example I can think of where my wife, Natalie, was in a competition and she had gotten wrapped too early. And so she's standing there when the lifter before her just got called to the bar. And, they're completing the squat and she's standing there in the tightest possible wraps and just like, her legs are just going numb. How can you sit there and think like, I'm going to go out there and lift this and I can't feel my legs right now? That is mentally tough.
No, it's a tough call.
Yeah.
I mean, because I've been in that situation. So you have to make a decision. Do you take them off?
Yeah.
Put them back on.
Rewrap in time.
Yeah. Because you got to make that call fast. Like real fast because you may not have the time to do it.
Yeah.
But once this would be where her mental strength came in. Once she made the commitment to what it was, she just stayed with it and then just relax.
Yeah.
Because you can't feel your feet, which it's an interesting thing with that. We kind of talked a little bit about the arousal curve or the importance of the arousal for the training when it comes to the RPE.
Yeah.
Is that, because this goes back to that grit thing too, is that a trainable? It's definitely I think it's trainable on how to pull it back. I don't know if it's trainable on, so let's take the arousal curve. So make sure we're talking on the same definition.
Yeah.
Everybody plots differently on this curve, right? So you might be a 2, right? So for you to go from a 2 to a 4, that's a lot, right? And that's your arousal. So you're not going to look like a screaming maniac because you're still right here. There's other people that just naturally might be a 4, just type A, high strung.
Yeah.
And then 5 is where they can go. 6, they're actually on the back end of this curve. Really hard to get a 2 to get to the back end of this curve.
Yeah.
Now the 2 can definitely get to the 4, maybe the 5, but in my experience, if you see them like at a 6 or a 7, they're faking it. It's not real.
Yeah.
Like they're just doing what they're doing because somebody told them that's what they have to do. Yeah. But it's not instilling any more confidence than they had in the first place. Yeah. So that's where I think this comes into, you either have it or you don't, from what people will perceive. From what is internally inside that person, it's a completely different thing, because I've always said it all comes down to confidence. If you can get under the weight, you can squat the weight. Yeah. You're 100% confident you can squat this weight. It doesn't matter
what it looks like from the outside.
No.
Yeah.
And I think it's a mistake for people. Oh, he's not hyped up enough. Go smack him in the face. Well, if he needs smacked in the face, yes. If he doesn't, that's a stupid thing to do.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think there's a component of that's genetic. I think the trainable component is being able to get them to go a couple of notches up from that. Have you found that to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So the important point for people listening to this is you don't have to be slapped or look like a crazed maniac in order to perform well. What is important is that everyone has an individual curve of arousal, where Dave was talking about earlier, too low and you underperform, too high and you underperform. There's some kind of sweet spot in the middle there, and everyone's kind of a little bit different in there. So you want to find out what that range is best for you. And the playground for experimentation is training, not in competition. So test this all out well before a competition, and then apply it in training what you've learned. And pay attention to how you feel. So if you find that you feel like under aroused in competition, do you have tactics that can increase your arousal? Or too aroused, do you have tactics that decrease your arousal? So some of my favorite ones for being too aroused and decreasing it is putting on headphones, taking a few deep breaths, like kind of calming timed breaths as well, removing myself from the environment if I can. So like go outside and just kind of like take a few deep breaths outside and, kind of bring myself back in. That can help as well. Journaling or writing out some thoughts just on your phone, just kind of tapping it out real quick can help. Recognizing it in the first place is great. On the under-aroused side, it's almost the exact opposite. It's adding in music that's very energetic can certainly help. Having like almost pressure breaths or like quick breaths, can kind of like raise your heart rate and raise your sense of arousal. A lot of people in powerlifting use like physical type of stuff. So like slaps, pats on the back. Of course, we have ammonia right here that can do the same exact thing. All these are great. And they're basically tools to kind of like modify exactly where you are so that you're at that peak for arousal for you.
I think it's important to know what it is, as you said. I like the play in competition, then apply to training. I like that because that's where you're going to find it, the most, where I think strategies more for lifters who are closer to the top, more training age experience, because where they compete, your top's different than somebody else's top.
Yeah.
Right. Fact. It is what but they still have to learn how to modify a lot of those arousal changes that you're talking about over time. When you get to a higher level, have to happen fast.
You're right. Yeah.
You could be going, approaching your third squat and you're too much, and you got 10 seconds to realize this, or your coach, this is too much, back it down, and then be able to shift that, or the other part, like, shit, this is not where I need to be right now. It has to come up.
Yeah.
Fast.
I've seen people in competition who are like masters at both of those. Someone's coming out for a big squat and obviously feels pressure because maybe it's an important number or something like that. And all they do coming out of the platform is like pull their arms out to the side and just like kind of push down a little bit. And now they're in their place. I think ritual matters a lot here. So like doing the same damn thing every time you get on the platform really helps with making sure a lot of this stuff is repeatable. Or the opposite, they say bars loaded and you just yell, like you just let out this guttural yell to kind of raise yourself up to this level that you need to. Whatever that tool is for you, finding out like what works for you and sticking with it is so important.
For myself, I had to find like anchor connections.
Yeah.
Like if my hand started shaking, it's too much. That was okay. Stop. Just stop.
Yeah.
Right. And visualization has been a part since very, very young. So if I could not visualize and get it set on what it needs to be, it's too much. Right. So there was those things. If the doubt, because it's anybody that's honest, there's always doubt. If there's I don't want to say too little doubt but there's a balance. And if like a teeter-totter, just a little balance, little off, it's like, fuck, this needs to change. And then change it just a notch, because that's a big difference. Sometimes that didn't happen. Sometimes it would be, I'm tired. Yeah. Like this is a third, I need to conserve everything, still get in my head right, but then not tip that notch until I'm actually under the bar. Yeah. Then tip, instead of burning it 15 seconds before, that becomes an art and a skill too. Yeah. Yeah. I found having a handler really helps with a lot of this kind of stuff. Yes. So having someone who, you've worked with a few times, who knows you and kind of knows like what you need can be critical in spaces like this. So like I'm typically like, I bring the arousal and like the anxiety and like
panic to competitions a lot of times, because most of the competitions the last 3 or 4 years, there have been very high stakes. In the United States, especially, national championships is almost harder than worlds, because you must win nationals. You have to win nationals to go on to the world level. And the United States is so competitive that it's almost harder than the world championship. Feels that way to me, at least. It feels like more pressure. And my handlers have been great at like cracking these shitty dad jokes that just break all the tension. And I just kind of feel more at ease. You know what I mean? They just kind of like take the temperature down and make it feel a little bit more like a training session, which is kind of how I perform best.
Did that change over your time in the sport?
Yeah. When after I won a national championship, it kind of felt like, all right, the pressure's on now. Cause like, I have to win the next one, you know what I mean? Cause I won the last one. So I have to win now. And then it became like, that was kind of a shift where competing felt less like doing heavy lifts on a platform and more like, performing to get to the next level. You know what I mean? It really became more about like competing in a true sense of a sport, and me versus other people. One of us must succeed and the other one will fail in a very like kind of like final way. Yeah. So that's really when it changed.
So did your mindset on how you approached the training change? Like where I'm getting at is when we're all younger, man, we're driving to the gym, listening to AC/DC on 10, like we're getting psyched up 3 hours before the actual lift, right? I mean, you're drawing pictures of squatters on your desk, you know, and shit like that. And then 10 years later, you know every exit, you know, on the way to the gym to pull off, because you really don't want to fucking do it, right? At least you don't want to drive there. Now, when you get there, it will come around. Did you go through that same path?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I remember early on, like the music was such a critical part for me. A lot.
So stupid.
Yeah. It's the right song. It has to be in the right order. Yeah, absolutely. And like, I'd be lying if I said the music wasn't an important part of it now. Like it is. It's a huge way that I connect to lifting now. But things don't have to like feel like perfectly aligned in training for me to have a good session. But like the loads that I'm hitting matter a lot. And I think the last, 8 weeks before competition now feel like they matter a lot more. You know, like every session feels consequential and like the temperature feels like it's turned up. And there's no reason for that. You know, like my body is like the same body that's going to go in there and perform and either be successful in the lift or not, maybe even less successful if I'm feeling all this pressure, you know, headed into a competition, than if I would have just like turned the temperature down and just lift like the way that I have for years and years and years.
We talked a little bit before the podcast on the impact of technology, because when you came into the sport, I believe forums were a thing, right? And then it was Facebook. And then, you know, we kind of agreed that the first real big pivot point is when training logs moved from websites and forums to Instagram. And so I've been through the thing from magazines through forums, actually through the internet, through seeing forums made, and then through that. So my perspective is a little different because I've seen different iterations, but I've seen the same cycles. Yeah. Kind of over. How have you seen the changes with technology and the powerlifting as you've gone through, both as an athlete, but also as a coach?
Yeah, it's really hard for me to have like any decisive opinion on this. I feel so ambivalent because there's goods and bads. Yeah. It's great that we get so many more examples in the world of great technique, of good performances, of like positive information, role models out there that people can find. It's great that, we're so connected now that you can like talk with someone in France about their training and learn about their training in a way that we really never had access to before. Or that you can share your training and, you know, have access to a larger community of support and stuff like that. But what I've seen that I don't like is a few things, but one is like this sense that normal people who just want to train and be powerlifters feel like they have to almost like promote themselves or talk about their training in this kind of like, I don't know, like I'm presenting this out to the world rather than this is my journal. There's a shift where it's more about self-promotion, about trying to find sponsors, about like making you more than yourself or like a bigger than life kind of person. And that's fine for the people who are top level athletes. And I feel like it kind of rubs off on many people and almost like this is the standard that you have to talk about your training, you know? So, I think about that. Like, I don't know, it can be easy to think very pessimistically about the younger generation, about, you know, social media and the direction powerlifting is headed in. I have a lot of sympathy for people trying to navigate all of this these days, you know, and a lot of love of like, we're all just trying to figure this out. I was a dumb kid at one point who was, you know, posting memes on Facebook or, you know, like just like being dumb. I think time hop for me, like time hop is that feature now where you can see stuff that you posted in the past. Mm-hmm. Like it's great for me just because it gives me perspective on like how dumb I used to be. And like, I was just a kid being a kid. And it's that perspective that I use a lot of times when I look at posts out there online. Like, yeah, you look, you know, some person's like hyping themselves up to level 11 on the platform and there's like, you know, 130 kilos on the bar or something like that. And I'm thinking like, I can see myself in you, you know, like where I was just like a dumb kid and stuff. And this is just like part of the process. It's just in a different way now.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of how I see it is you can look and see, because it's before me, there are people looking at my generation, my age, and what the fuck are you guys doing? Mm-hmm. You know, and that's just natural. You know, it just happens where you kind of got to remember what it was like when you were on the other side of the table, right? So if I'm mentoring somebody now, I always remember, like I remember when I was the person on the other side, looking at the person giving me the advice saying, shut up, fucking dude, you're done. You're washed up. You're fucking beat up. I know those thoughts and I've made a real conscious effort to never let go of them, right? So that way I can kind of see where they're coming from, where if they're new and they're just coming in and they're younger and they're using Instagram or TikTok or whatever the fuck it is, they don't know the sport without that. So we look at it because we know the sport without that. Yeah. So we're putting a certain lens on this that they don't have the opportunity to actually look through, because they don't know. So to them, this is how it is, and hell, how it's always been for all they know. So they don't know. Now, as they move forward and that lens changes, because it will, you know, 10 years from now, it's not going to be what it is now. It could be some AI shit, you know, it's going to be something completely different where they're going to be looking on the new generation with different lenses of perspective to be able to say, oh man, that's dumb as fuck. Yeah. You know, because they have that different perspective where to me, as long as the main thing's the main thing in powerlifting, you know, you besting your total, you becoming a better lifter. Yeah. And we never forget that. That's the answer to all of it to me.
Where's some elite FTS thing? Like live, learn, pass on.
Yeah. As long as it's the main thing, right? If that is there, then federations don't matter, drama doesn't matter, drug-free, drug use, gear, non-gear, none of that matters because everybody's on the same journey to increase their total. If the total's 400 pounds or 3,000 pounds, it's the same thing at its core. And I don't think that's lost today on today's lifters any more than I think that it was lost from the very beginning. I think people like to put their circumstances into lifters today that don't have the same circumstances. Like the old guy talking about, I had to go to school walking uphill both ways in the snow.
In the snow.
Like, they couldn't do this shit if they had to do it, you know, without all this crap. Well, yeah, they could. You know, the same way that people before me and everybody else did. So to me, it's a net positive. Yeah. But there is a lot of net negative that the comparison thing, you know, some of the things that we talked about, that fucks their training up. I can say that I never read an article in a magazine growing up, like a Powerlifting USA article, that made me want to go in the gym and max out. Nothing I ever read made me wanted to change where I was in my training cycle, ever. Where now I don't know if that's the case. They see somebody do something like, oh, I need to do that, or I'm not strong enough. So they're being influenced to change programming.
Yeah, much more frequently, or technique or something like that. That's definitely a drawback that I see. The comparison piece that you talked about, as much as seeing positive role models as one, how you interpret someone stronger than you is really important. Good for them is one way of thinking about that, or kind of like a zero-sum gain. Like if they get stronger, that means that I can't get stronger, is like another way, like this comparison as, oh no, now I'm falling behind, is another way that I think people can think a lot. The other unfortunate aspect of social media in the current existence of it is that it's not always the smartest voices that are pushed to the top. It's the loudest voices that are pushed to the top. So virality and just kind of the algorithms amplifying things that maybe don't deserve to get amplified just because they are sensational. So people can kind of like shortcut attention and use that system to push content out.
They can, but that doesn't last.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been around long enough to know that. I mean, we don't need to throw names out, but you can throw out a lot of popular names that they're no longer around. For most of them, if they can get a good stretch, 2-3 years.
Yeah, you're right.
Then they're doing good. That would probably be the advice I would have, is look at the underbelly if you're coming through the sport, right? Because the underbelly, the people just underneath them, their voices aren't going to be as loud, but their voices have been around for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 25, and there's probably multiple reasons why they're not the loudest voice. But even if they happen to get the loudest voice, it's not going to last long, because that's just not how this whole thing works.
Yeah.
Then it comes back down. But it's 100% what you're saying, is because that's where people are going to be attracted to, where I can flip that into a positive and say, that's the magnet that gets them in. If they stay more than a couple of years, they learn real quick that magnet's not what they thought. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
But I really, really like this thing. So now I want to find somebody that really knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then that's where they find those other voices and kind of move from there. As long as those other voices don't get discouraged.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because we need them. We need that. We need both, but we need them more than we need the more we just need the more popular ones as a sounding board. Bring them in.
Yeah.
Like, bring them in. Just keep doing that. Right. Bring them in. Sell your stupid ebook for $5. Just bring them in.
Yeah.
And then, because realistically, if I'm being honest, you really don't want the people that they bring in when they bring them in. You want them to seed a couple years.
Yeah, that's a nice way of thinking about it. I've only ever kind of viewed that as like a negative, but you're saying it's essentially like an attractor. Get people interested in a hobby, and then they'll naturally find, the right educational resources.
It's a funnel.
Yeah.
So they're getting the top of the funnel, right? And then by the time they move down the funnel, then they're a client you actually want to work with. Not that true beginner that has no idea, like, oh, this is cool. I want to try this. And then you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like there's 800 questions every hour.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
So it's perspective kind of plays into that, but it's tough, man, because we get caught up in that same game. We're going to look to them and then make false assumptions. They're making tons of money, right? We don't actually know if that's true. Right. In most cases, it's not. The people that are making, you'd be surprised, the people that are making more money are the underbelly. Right. But that's not the perception.
Yeah.
But they are, because there's something called lifetime value of a customer that accumulates. I mean, you probably got clients that you've had for years upon years.
Yeah.
Those accumulate, then those referrals accumulate. The top of the funnel, they have to find new people every day, because their compensation is usually just coming from ad revenue. So it's all hits, likes, and all that. So they have to have
quick,
huge amounts of traffic, which if you're training people, you don't need. Who cares if you have 1,000 subscribers or 1 million? I'd rather have 1,000 with like 30 than want to be clients. Right?
Yeah. Matt Gary, the guy who handles me, he said, I think the expression was there's riches in niches. Some book he read was saying something about like, it's better to have like 1,000 dedicated people who just love your shit. You know, they just want to see everything you put out, and they'll, you know, follow you to the end of the earth, like that kind of thing. And like, that's, you know, better than kind of chasing this short-term kind of thing. I do think though, like as we've moved through these social media networks, the average length of content has dropped and dropped and dropped. You know, from article, like reading an article, geez, it's going to take you, I don't know, 15 to 30 minutes or something like that. There's YouTube videos, there's Facebook posts and kind of some comments in the Facebook posts, and like Instagram, you know, we've got like a minute to, I don't know, 10 minutes now. And like TikTok is like just boom, boom, boom. And there's some benefits to that too, but I think there's a lot of drawbacks in that. Sometimes it takes a while to really digest a concept, and the attention span just might not be there.
It has. I came into this thing when, you know, we had to post articles using HTML, using front page, you know, so there was none. YouTube, I don't even know, was around. Yeah. So it was, content's always changed and always will change. I was getting all kinds of heat and hate, or whatever you want to call it, because I was online, you know, so I was disrupting magazines that didn't like the fact, now, wait a minute, this shit's free. It's online. This is bullshit. They should have to pay $4 for the magazine or whatever it was. And at the same time, crazy as this is going to sound, oh, this shit ain't never going to last. Like the internet's not going to last. Right. So but over time, you know, it went from, you know, written articles, medium form, right? Then it started to get more longer form, more digestible. Then it started to become not really article format, but internet article format, like skim reading. They had to be able to skim read. Yeah. Right. So it wasn't an article as we would think of an article. It's like header, you know, bold, every paragraph, instead of a paragraph now needs a header for the paragraph, because, you know, people are going to scroll down, not read the article, look at the header, maybe read a couple paragraphs. Oh, this is cool. Then go read. So it migrates from that. Then it goes blogs, you know, condensed versions of that. Yeah. And then with Elite FTS, I tried to cover 3 bases, where if I had a training log and I had a coaching log and then articles, and it was one team member that we were trying to brand, the articles could show the intelligence. The Q&A could show that they actually give a fuck about somebody to answer their questions, and the training log could show they walk the walk. That's cool. So it was kind of for all 3 of those. But as technology increases, Facebook kind of killed the coaching logs, because now you can just go to the coach. It actually killed the Q&A before it killed the coaching logs, because why ask here when I can just go directly to the person and have a conversation? Yeah. Not just a straight Q&A. And then slowly it kind of killed the coaching logs, and then the training logs got whacked with Instagram, because why post the video, which is an embedded video of YouTube, and put it all here when I can just put it all here? So it moved it all over, and then it became shorter. But the saving grace of this being in this content space is the long form podcast do amazingly well. So now what we have is really weird, right? Super short, like 10 seconds short, like stupid short. Yeah. Then stupid long, like 10 seconds or 4 hours, you pick. Yeah. Like fucked up, right? Like what the hell? Yeah. And then like in the middle, it's kind of weird because politically, isn't it how that works too? Like the ends are getting fucking more, but in the middle, nobody gives a fuck.
Yeah.
But that's where everybody is. It's kind of like somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Where it's, who knows how that's going to change, moving forward.
Yeah.
But I think what people are looking for is authenticity, right? So now if it's a longer form or even longer form video content, they get to know the person. Because that's this difference maker, right? The clips are just a waste of time. Like, well, it's not, because it helps grow whatever the other stuff is, so it is there. But as a consumer of the content, it's a time suck that you got to try to avoid, because that's why I don't keep TikTok on my phone. Because the couple times I did, geez, like 3 hours goes by.
Yeah, it's
like, what the fuck did I just watch? And how did I get sucked into it again? Like after the third time, I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So it's not on there. Where you are right because of what's happening there. Because even on Instagram over the last few years, I used to call them microblogs. Right. So like a micro blog, just a shorter blog that you put in there, were getting a lot of, they were doing well. And then now they suck, so it was reels and now it's sliders or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So the text, if I'm 3 years, there probably won't be a text block, so there'll be nowhere to put text. It's just going to be whatever's going to go in there.
Video content. Yeah. It's interesting. I don't want to sound like a curmudgeon, but at the same time, like maybe things actually are changing, like sometimes calling a warning to some of this kind of stuff is actually calling a warning to some of this. And it's not just me being like, oh, times have changed, things are different. So all I really want is for people to have access to good information, like when they want it, and, be able to like have the attention to read it and absorb it and, integrate it in their training and, actually have conversations with other lifters, and for there to be a place for that. So I don't know where we're headed. I think in a few weeks, Apple's coming out with a Reality OS headset. It's the latest for their thing with mixed reality. So we'll see if that's the future of social media eventually. We'll see.
There's always pros and cons. Where if we just dial it back, right? So let's keep it in the powerlifting realm. Internet doesn't exist. We have Powerlifting USA that comes out once a month. Now in Powerlifting USA, there's articles about training by ex-lifter. Most of the time, ex-lifter did not write that article. Somebody else did. So it's not authentic in the first point.
It's true.
So it's not what it is. So the workout of the month sometimes was the person who wrote the workout of the month. Most of the time it wasn't. The other articles that were nutrition related were typically wrote by the supplement companies submitting the article under an alias. Bodybuilding magazines notorious for all that. So you don't know if what you were getting back there was real or bullshit.
It's fucked up.
Most of it was bullshit. Yeah. And it was all you had. Right. So now you're getting it and you're thinking, oh my God, all these bodybuilders, they're making tons of money because they show all the fucking closets with 1 million tennis shoes and, sport cars and all this other stuff. And oh my God, these supplements, I have to eat this. I have to do this. It's all bullshit. Yeah. And then the magazines, if they had their athletes, they created the narrative for who that athlete was, even if it's Sports Illustrated or a different thing. So you're reading about ex-pro bodybuilder. You're like, man, this is the shit. It's a great dude. Yeah. Right. Dude never wrote any of this. It's not even his personality. It's the narrative that the magazine or their sponsor wanted to put out there to be able to sell more product. That sounds worse. Like if we were to go to that now,
I agree.
That's way worse. Yeah. Where now, it kind of does suck because the people that don't have a personality to be able to showcase or don't want to develop that, they're not going to get these multi-million-dollar deals or $1 million deals or whatever it was that they were getting from supplement companies because the personality sucks and the supplement company can't write the script. They can't tell the story.
Yeah, it has to be from them specifically.
Yeah. Right. So in a way, it put it all into the athlete's hands. Like now your brand is your brand. Right. So what you do coaching wise, you never would have been able to do, through well, I guess you could. You put an ad in Powerlifting USA, but then you got to compete with the people who are buying the bigger ads.
Yeah.
And you're selling a little program in the back of the book of a 5-6 week bench program. But if you're not world champion that's got 10 times world champion titles, you see it. So
social media does democratize everyone's ability to like all be on an even playing field.
Yeah. And more voices are better, but it's up to us to educate the listeners of how to vet the voices.
Yeah.
Because it'd be hypocritical to say, here's who you should listen to because I have a business. So there's going to be a bias behind what I'm going to say there.
Yeah.
And if it's somebody that's in an education business that sells education, then that's what's going to be there. But to help vet them, like, here's the things that you should be looking for, and go that route.
Essentially building critical thinking skills for people. Like, how can you smell bullshit easier?
Yes.
That's so, I want to say critical, but it's critical.
I had some questions here through the Discord.
Oh, cool.
This is a weird one, so you're going to have to help me out on this one, because I didn't find this when I was going through your stuff.
Okay.
I know he did some training in the past where he would have someone load the weights for him and then cover them with garbage bags, so he didn't know how much weight was on the bar to take the mental fear. So I need to know about this.
All right. I attended this powerlifting conference called EPC, European Powerlifting Conference, in 2018. And there's a fantastic sports psychologist named Hugh Gilmore there. He's given this presentation. One thing he talks about, he does work with the British weightlifting team. And one thing he talks about with the British weightlifting team is sometimes when athletes get anxious about a certain weight on the bar, they're actually able to like lift just fine. It's just that the anxiety is interfering with their ability to lift because they're so nervous about, a specific number or something like that. And what he would do is almost like put these two curtains on the side of the bar so that all they can see is the bar and they can't see the plates on the other side. So he'd have them like leave the room, he'd load the bar, they would come back in the room, all they see is a bar. I thought that's a great idea. Let me try that.
But didn't have the curtains.
I didn't have the curtains, right? So I would turn around, someone would load the bar and then cover it with trash bags and just kind of tape it around. So it's just like a bar on a squat rack with two trash bags on the side. And I trained like that for like 4 weeks or something like that for some of my heavy sessions. And honestly, like there was some variability in what weight I thought was on the bar. It's not crazy. It's not like I'm going to take, I don't know, 280 kilos and move it like 320 kilos or something like the other way around.
Yeah.
But it did tell me that, like what weight is on the bar, like really doesn't matter. Like essentially don't let this get to my head. Is this something that I would suggest for athletes? Just like Hugh, I would really only use this in cases where someone had specific anxiety around a specific number. And I think for athletes in the United States, a great and much easier way to do this is just load something in kilos. Problem solved.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
Because it's going to look less too.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's less on the bar. What was the other one? What were some of the ways Bryce and Natalie have supported? This is a better one. What are some ways Natalie have supported each other in the past, physically, mentally, leading into a major contest?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of the ways are pretty mundane. Like something feels heavier. We kind of work our way through that. We're good training partners for each other too, so we're pretty in tune with when we need more space or less space with each other. Like we're both high-level athletes, both train at the same time. So we need to know kind of how to keep that personal space and stuff. So how do we perform best? What do we need to hear right before we, do a heavy squat, since we're both squatting each other? So kind of learning the language that we each need to hear before competition. One of my favorite things that we've done to support each other, we learned from some Olympic athlete who wrote a letter to his wife. Like they're both high level athletes, and they would write a letter that you're only supposed to read, like, when you're in the warm up room before you go. And it's like all these positive things. Like, this is why I love you. Like, this is why you're a great athlete. This is why I think you're going to succeed. And that's awesome. We've done that for each other a few times so far, and it's awesome. I highly encourage anyone to do that, because it's just like the purest way to show like, I support you, you know, like explicitly, these are the things that I think you have. This is why I think you have what it takes. And it's great to just put you in a great headspace.
So how's this work on those days that you guys aren't getting along, but you got to go in and train?
Yeah. Or we're just having a really shitty session. Like, I don't want to talk about it. Like, I just want to feel bad and feel shitty for a little bit. You know? Just being honest about that, you know, like, you know, I got it. I'll be fine. We'll talk about this post training or something like that. Communication like comes first in circumstances like that. We're not perfect, but you know, we're certainly better than we were before. And it took us some time to kind of figure out like, how are we going to train together as high level athletes for both of us? How do we navigate this? So if you're in this situation ever, like, start off with like, what do you need and what do I need in training? And just kind of start there. Like, what are your expectations of me? What do you need from me? Because I know from a few people, like, sometimes you get to the gym and you just split and you guys both each go your separate ways and that's it. And then you're together afterwards, but in the middle, you're just an athlete. So you kind of have to decide, like, what do you want this to be like? I don't think there's one specific way. You just kind of have to figure out how this works best for you.
And how long have you guys been doing it that way?
About 5 years now.
So is she still competing now?
Yeah, she is.
So how are you going to navigate this space where she's still competing, but you're not?
I'm still asking her, like, what do you need? You know, what do you need from me and stuff like that? Her training sessions are usually longer than mine. So I'll bring like a book or something to read, you know, I'll wrap her knees and stuff like that. And there's times where I straight up miss, you know, she wants more from me than I'm giving her. Or sometimes where like she's totally fine and like I just think like, does she need me? Does she not need me?
Yeah.
And like in all these cases, like communication is the best way forward. And I'm getting better at that over time, like asking like, are you good? Like, do you need me?
Yeah. Well, I can see, but it's not every session is it necessary.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a deload session, like,
sure,
the fuck, you know, like, what's the point? You know, now other ones I can see are mandatory, you know, for that as well.
For sure.
Were there talks you had that I didn't bring up?
No, I feel really happy about this.
Actually, you put a Q&A up. Did people submit anything that on your...
A lot of it was stuff about, you know, burnout and, you know, my time being done with powerlifting. And, you know, we've kind of talked about some of that stuff. I will say, you know, because this podcast kind of feels like the end of a pretty large chapter for me. Like coming here, you know, 2 weeks after saying that I'm done competing feels like a nice kind of bookend to this chapter and kind of talking with you through this kind of stuff. It feels really good and freeing actually, to just kind of talk my way through that and to come here to Elite FTS and be here, you know, feels like, wow, like I made it. I got to be here and, you know, be on this podcast with you. Some of the questions were just around programming and stuff like that. I'm happy to answer those whenever, you know, so if you're listening to this and you have questions, just, you know, send me a message.
How would you define your training philosophy on programming? So let's separate now, you know, all the other factors, which I think are necessary, absolutely necessary to go into being a coach. Outside of being a coach, there is what I would just call programming, right? There's that component, which I think is overemphasized compared to the other. Like you can have a shitty program, but have all the other on point and probably do better than a great program with all the other stuff. I think that's a big miss. Yeah. But what would you consider, how would you define your training programming philosophy?
I think that balance and like moderation are probably like at the core. You know, what can I program for athletes that feels sustainable and repeatable for them, that if they feel good, they can go up. If they feel bad, then they can go down. Essentially, like, how can I make a program that makes them stronger, but also knits in with other aspects of their life and doesn't demand too much from them they can't give, that is flexible in the right times. That's really where I try to push for programming.
So would you say it's higher frequency? I mean, let's step way back. Is it if we were to divide it from conjugate, pure linear, or block, or where would that fall?
It would be, it's block periodized, but within each block, the reps tend to drop across weeks. So we'll start off with higher reps and work our way down to lower reps.
Sure.
In a broad sense.
In each block?
In each block, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the reps don't stay static each block. I find that if I keep the reps static, number one, it's harder to add load to the bar. So if we're just like adding 5%, then either week one is way too easy, and you're able to add 5% each week as you go forward, or 1 week ends up way too difficult and it's just impossible to add load, or you're just struggling. Or if you drop and you're only adding like, let's say 2.5% per week, then that increase feels almost insubstantial over a number of weeks. So I tend to like reducing reps because it gives more room to add load. And it also adds in a little bit of variety that keeps training a little bit more exciting for athletes.
On average, how long is each block?
Like 3 to 5 weeks, something like that.
And then how many blocks to, I'm going to call it finding their neutral? Yeah. Because that's kind of what you were saying. How many blocks does it typically take for you to be able to find their neutral?
What do you mean by
neutral? Because you said you want to train them to a position that you can adjust up or down.
Yeah.
Well, you have to get them in X position to be able to adjust up or down.
Oh yeah.
So that's what I would call neutral or a starting gate or whatever it is.
Yeah, pretty quickly. When I start a brand new athlete, I lean on a lot of information from them about, what they've been doing before they start. How often were you training? What did your training look like? And that information isn't insignificant. I know some coaches are like, yeah, whatever. You didn't know shit before you started with me. I think those are clues that, like let us know at least what was sustainable for them in the past. Maybe not what they're capable of now, but it's a good starting point. So I try to start people pretty close to that. And then maybe we add a little bit of volume here and there, or if someone was like, training way too much, maybe we dial it back or something like that. So training frequency, training number of days per week, all that stuff I can figure out pretty quickly. The thing that takes a little bit longer is the amount of volume. So like the amount of sets per week roughly that the athlete needs in order to progress, just because we don't do a training test until like 8 weeks in, typically 8 to like 12 weeks in. So sometimes it takes a while to figure out, oh, wow, we made great progress on your squat, but your bench press was kind of around the same. We're going to need more training volume for that. And it took, 8 to 12 weeks to even figure that out in the first place.
What are some of the common issues that you see on athletes you inboard? New ones.
Yeah. Maybe athletes who are like inflexible a lot of times. So regardless of how they're feeling, they're going to put this weight on the bar because the page says to put this weight on the bar, rather than kind of listening to their body. So being in tune like that, or not knowing like common exercise swaps in situations where they don't have access to a particular piece of equipment. So like my program said leg press, but I was on travel and the hotel gym didn't have leg press. So I just didn't train legs. Yeah. Well, like just do a lunge, here are like the available options that you could have done. So those kind of lessons take a little bit more time. And then I think the thing that takes a little bit longer is like knowing when to push and when to back off. And those kind of things are just like little lessons that take some time. But yeah, training, like you said before, is not that complicated. It's a little bit easier to figure out. And especially in powerlifting compared to other sports that are a lot more complicated.
So in a given week, you can bounce between a beginner coming into the sport to a very high-end athlete training for a Worlds. What are the biggest differences between those two athletes globally? In other words, I could say, a beginner typically needs to learn how to train hard, where the advanced needs to learn how to back off. Yeah. What are some of the other things that you've seen?
The conversations really shift. So like for beginners, we're focusing a lot more on technique. So like, this is how I want you to do the lift. So there's a lot more focus on video and watching video and stuff like that. But for the advanced athletes, like we barely talk about technique. It's more just making sure training is appropriate for them, talking about what's going on outside the gym. How does that affect what's going on inside the gym, troubleshooting anything that comes up. But if there's high level athletes who I've worked with for a while, they're very self-sufficient. We've taught them enough skills that they can adjust their training as needed. So a lot of it's just kind of more about like keeping in that groove that keeps them successful. We've already figured out a formula for their training, and really it's just kind of about like giving it time and just kind of letting them work in. So like coaching for advanced athletes, you can talk about more advanced things, but once you kind of run through that list, there's a lot less that changes over time. So it's more just about being a good friend, being a mentor, rather than changing things on a weekly basis. In the early stages, there's a lot of, knobs and dials. All right, well, you can't do this exercise because it hurts your triceps. So let's find this other one. It's like figuring out the formula for them. And then once you have the formula, it's small modifications from there and troubleshooting over time.
What are with that troubleshooting? Because I get what you're saying, because a lot of those modifications that the beginner doesn't know, the advanced person's just already doing anyhow. Like if the tricep feels jacked, they're just going to do something else.
Yeah.
I mean,
and they just tell you after the fact rather than asking.
Yeah. Where with them, there's, you touched on it, because there's factors outside of their life that need to be pulled back into control, albeit sleep or whatever it's going to be. What are the biggest pitfalls and most common pitfalls with them? Is it sleep? Is it nutrition? Is it just staying the fuck off the internet? Is it, where do those fall?
Almost everyone needs more sleep than they're getting. This is like system wide with all athletes. Almost everyone needs more sleep than they're getting. And so just saying like you need more sleep, like that doesn't really do much. So like, let's make it more concrete for someone. Let's say charge your phone outside the bedroom, or let's say, do you think you can commit to a 10 o'clock PM bedtime, Monday through Friday this week? Let's get very specific about what it is. Let's make it like a short-term process-oriented goal. And let's see what happened. Essentially, we're running a mini test, and let's check the outcome of it before we just kind of make another adjustment from there.
So you'll just make one at a time.
Yeah.
Okay. So you'll prioritize, because it could be obviously many, right? So is sleep the one that typically is going to be the first that you're going to address with them?
Yeah. Every once in a while it's protein intake, but for powerlifters, nutrition can be a lot more flexible. So we're looking at total calories and we're looking at protein intake over time. So we even don't need to have the athletes weigh themselves every single day. Like 1 or 2 weight readings per day or per week, and just kind of seeing that go on is plenty of data. So I guess another pillar for me is tracking the minimal amount of data that gives us the maximum amount of information. I don't want people tracking, every little thing down to the detail. They don't have time for it. It also gives them, like, if they fail to track something, they have a feeling of guilt and shame afterwards. Plus, I think sometimes for coaches, tracking stuff has the like illusion of greater information, but doesn't really give you anything more actionable than you have otherwise. Like maybe one example is like tracking femur size. Like, what are you going to do with that on a regular basis? And there's all these little bits of information for powerlifting that really don't tell us a whole lot. So as a general philosophy, I want to get away with tracking the least with the most amount of return on that information. So anyways, protein intake, calories, that's great. And then once we kind of have that basis, I think a lot of people fall away from what I might call like healthy eating. I do too, where it comes to like, what do you imagine like an Olympic athlete preparing for a sport would eat? And it's like, greens, whole grains, like lean sources of protein, and doing that not just like once, but all the time, and how can I get athletes to move closer to that over time with these small actionable things that they can do on a regular basis?
What would be some of those things?
All right. So we take one meal at a time and we examine it and say, like, what are you eating for lunch? All right, well, I don't have a whole lot of time because I'm in between meetings. So like I'll order something out. And like maybe a low hanging fruit is, all right, well, if you order out, let's do one of those fast casual places like Chipotle, and let's get, an all salad base. And like, this is the thing that you do. So you want to meet someone where they're at rather than just like, all right, well, we just need to redo everything. You're going to meal prep on the weekends. Like we have to make this sustainable and something they can actually do. So rather than thinking of the perfect solution, let's think of the solution that works within the confines of what's going on in their life. Smaller changes are better. So finding one kind of small tweak is going to be the way to go. So that would be one. Another thing would be like another example with nutrition is like, what are you doing for dinner, or what are you doing pre-training? Well, pre-training, I have a protein shake and mango, like some dried mango or something like that. That's actually pretty good. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. I was gonna say that's not bad.
Yeah. So
2 cheeseburgers.
2 cheeseburgers. Yeah. Can we swap those to dinner, and can we do something else, pre-training or something like that? So finding that compromise that works well, both for you as a coach, kind of helping them make better decisions, and them and their lifestyle, then that's the place that we want to go.
Any parting thoughts that you have?
It's been an honor being here with you. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been great talking to you. It's been great having you out. I think we covered all the things that I had down here, plus extra here. What's the next chapter?
We talked about identity quite a lot. I'm going to try to figure out what feels fun and engaging with fitness and do that. So I'm training like 3 times a week right now. I'm still squatting, benching, and deadlifting, but I'm doing what I call like the fun stuff for me. So I'm doing like a deadlift single and a bench single each week with a little more volume. I'm doing like some basic bodybuilding training, find some new exercises.
Wait a minute, a bench single and a deadlift single with more volume each week.
Sorry, with a little bit more volume on the bench after that. So I'll do like a bench single and like 3 sets of 6 or something.
Okay, I get it. I'm like, how in the hell are you going to increase the volume of a single each week, right?
Yeah. And I'm just trying to like, maybe I'll do some different fitness stuff, like just to mess around a little bit. I used to do a little bit of volleyball. I used to do some breakdancing. I'm going to go mountain climbing a little bit. I don't know. I just want to like do some different stuff and spice it up.
Now would be the time for you to go on a shit ton of steroids. All right. I'll leave that as the party thoughts. All right, guys, we're done. Thank you all.
Thank you.